You're now listening to Sanity at the Movies, Superman Edition. He stands for truth, justice, and the American way. I guess that means he stands for, like, pornography and corrupt late-stage capitalism. I mean, what's the American way, guys? Jake and Ben are falling out of their seats laughing. You can't
That's
hear
why
it.
we can't answer.
I had to edit it all out. Like, Jake is gasping for air right now. That's why he's not talking. Jake is a big Superman fan. He's probably insulted on Superman's behalf. I don't know. We'll find out. Hopefully Jake doesn't cast me into the Phantom Zone. Listen, we're talking about Superman.
Where you belong.
What's that?
Where you belong.
The Phantom Zone. Death seems preferable. That's what I've decided, having researched the mythology behind the Phantom Zone randomly. It's like you become a ghost, basically, and you're just stuck in stasis, and you can see everything that's happening in the real world, but you can't affect it, and you're just like that forever. Although sometimes on Krypton, they will sentence you to it for a while and then, take you out like jail or something like that. But I think Zod and Ursa and what's-his-face were just going to basically be stuck like that forever, which doesn't really seem like that nice of a punishment. I think in the lore, like Jor-El, he's such a kind, compassionate dude that he comes up with the Phantom Zone. He discovers it and then
Better
says,
than capital punishment.
we should do this instead of capital punishment. But if I had a choice between being trapped in stasis forever or death, I think I might choose death. I think probably most people would choose death. But
I don't know.
In any case, maybe they weren't thinking that hard about it when they came up with it.
Well, you're obviously not trapped in stasis forever if there's a way out.
That's true. Yeah.
So there's hope.
There's always hope. Yeah, but that's almost like a greater torment.
Yeah, that's torture. Perpetual hope.
Yep.
That's pretty nasty.
It's like that pit that Batman gets thrown into in whatever that. Awesome.
I was just going to say that.
Were you really?
No.
Well, listen, folks, we're talking about Superman, the movie that showed you that a man could fly. That was its tagline. You will believe a man can fly. And this is part of our superheroes journey that we are going on. You, our lovely patrons, got us to the place where we could talk about Superman, Superman 2, Batman, the 1989 one, of course, and then Batman Returns. All kind of seminal, defining superhero movies. Arguably, Batman is a little bit more influential on what superhero movies ultimately became for a long time. But Superman was the one where it was like, hey, we can do superhero movies now. As we'll talk about, nobody thought this was a good idea. Nobody thought that you could even take a superhero movie and make it into a movie. It was just ridiculous, which is why they're really overcompensating by hiring Brando and Hackman and Mario Puzo to write the script. And they're like, guys, we're adults. We swear we're doing something good. Brando wanted to be here. Brando wanted $4 million actually Brando wanted a lot more than $4 million. And he got it, but he didn't get enough to come back for part 2. Anyway, folks, this should be an exciting episode. So much to talk about. It's a great story. The making of this movie. It's an interesting movie. We'll talk about whether it's a good movie or not. We were actually just talking about this off mic. It's certainly an iconic movie with many good things. And I don't know, maybe it's a great movie. I could see that argument. Maybe it's a bad movie. I could see that argument. But we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it all. Who's talking, you might ask? Well, look who's talking. It's me. I'm the Bruce Willis. Who else was in Look Who's Talking? You guys remember that franchise?
Never saw
the babies.
Was Kirstie Alley part of that franchise?
Kirstie Alley was part of that franchise.
I've never seen it. I still know that.
May she rest in peace. If they do a Cheers reunion, they will not be able to get Kirstie Alley. She and Coach are both dead. Anyway, on that note, I'm Nathan, your humble and obedient host. We've got Ben right there. He's a preacher who's a teacher of Superman.
Very good.
Super heroic being himself.
Yep.
And Ben, why don't you introduce the most heroic of all of us? A man currently wearing a red cape and blue tights, I assume. He's got clothes over them, so it's hard to tell.
It is hard to tell.
I bet.
Yeah.
Just guess.
That is a good guess. He's Jake Menzel, the pastor who's a master of Superman. Yeah, that's you.
Hey.
Welcome, guys. Ooh, should we do super baggage first? What baggage do you guys bring to... This is going to be a lot of context and setting this in its historical time and all that sort of thing. But let's just get our own personal stuff out of the way first. Ben?
Nathan? I grew up watching Superman 2, a recorded copy from like a TV VHS recording of Superman 2.
Was it one of those ones where they added a bunch of extra footage like they used to do in those days?
I have no idea because I don't think I've ever seen it not from that recording. I've only seen clips of it. I haven't seen it since I was a kid, but I remember watching it over and over again, along with a TV edit of Terminator with the bad stuff taken out. I mean, still violent like Terminator, but so those were the two movies that I had on VHS and would watch over and over again. That's what I remember. So I know that I must have seen Superman, the original, at some point. But as I rewatched this movie, I was like, I hardly remember this. I remember that as a kid, this was really boring. And there were no bad guys to punch or anything cool like that. And that's what I wanted as a kid. And so I didn't really care about the original Superman.
You liked Zod and stuff.
Yeah. You had the city superhero battle long before cinema really tried to do that again, if memory serves. Like that, it was awesome. These guys flying and punching each other through
throwing
billboards.
cars,
Throwing cards. Just all this crazy stuff. It was the stuff.
You've got a saran-wrapped S.
Yeah, that was really cool too.
You've got Superman violently murdering Zod.
That was also really cool.
No one cared.
Kneel before Zod. Yeah, that was a great, very triumphant moment. You've got other weird and unpleasant stuff. Anyway, we'll get to that movie some other time. But that's my main Superman baggage.
Do you have a relationship with the character?
I wouldn't say much of one, no.
You're more of a Marvel guy, if memory
I'm
serves.
a Marvel guy. I didn't really read Superman comics. When Superman Returns came out, I was a decently big fan. Saw it several times. Liked it quite a bit. Superman Returns, I would say, is another kind of, sort of like this movie we're going to talk about. It's boring and stately, except it's a little more stately, actually, than the Superman movie in some ways. Maybe that's getting ahead of ourselves, but I don't know if Superman Returns is a good movie or not. I haven't seen it in years, but I just remember liking it, and liking Superman in it. And then you get to Man of Steel,
Yes.
which I ignored. Then I watched it on the internet. I streamed it at some point. I was like finally curious enough to actually see it. I don't know why I didn't want to see it in theaters. It's like, yeah, that was fun. It's quite dumb. And then the rest of the Snyder history, listeners of this podcast will know.
Well, I'll just do mine real fast because I think Jake probably has the most extensive history with Superman. I had a similar relationship with the movies in that I remember really liking Superman 2 as a kid because, like you said, it's just got a cityscape and being leveled and super heroics and violent conflict, whereas the first one, the action is more like Superman saves things, some of which I thought was pretty cool and which I appreciate really much more now. But back then it was like, I want to see him punch somebody.
Yep.
So the thing that I principally remember about this first Superman movie is the train gag when he makes himself a rail so that the train can go over him. I always thought that was really fun. And I was vaguely aware of this Lois and Superman stuff is obviously something that my parents appreciate. Like there's something sophisticated and adult and worldly going on here that ultimately, as I watch it now, isn't that sophisticated or adult or worldly. It's quite charming. But for a kid, it was like, this felt like Tracy and Hepburn or something like that. It's just like, there's wit here. There's things that my parents are chuckling at that I don't really get. So there was that level of Superman. Like I understood there were things that I didn't understand, which was not really my experience with Batman or with any of the other heroes. He felt a little bit more adult. I think from a fairly young age, I would have said the same thing that a lot of lame emo kids say, which is that Batman is my guy and Superman is just boring, too much of a boring straight arrow to really like or appreciate. So yeah, I read lots of Batman comics. I don't think I ever have read. No, I have read Superman. I finally read Grant Morrison's run, the All-Star Superman, but that was like when I was an adult, like within the span of being friends with you guys, maybe even in the span of doing podcasts together, I've read that. So it wasn't like a big influence on me when I was a kid. It was more something I wanted to go back and enjoy now. But so yeah, I don't know that I've had that big of a relationship with Superman. I remember very much not liking Superman Returns. It felt sour and mean-spirited, and I just remember Superman being stabbed with a green glowy thing and being sad and having a child out of wedlock and just all this stuff that didn't really feel very Superman to me. But then I loved Man of Steel, not because I thought it was a good Superman movie. I knew it was crap as a Superman movie, and I knew it was crap as a movie, but I just thought in terms of pure spectacle. Just leave it to someone as tasteless as Zack Snyder to ask and answer the question of what would happen if two super beings actually battled their way through New York or whatever, metropolis, a big city. And so the 9/11 times 1,000 mass destruction stuff I thought was pretty impressive, even if it's just morally like, Superman, what are you doing? So yeah, I enjoyed that movie, but not really as a Superman movie, just as a thing. And I think I like Superman better now. I think I have some appreciation for the character. I think coming to this movie, I appreciated many things about Superman and about certainly about what's-his-face's Christopher Reeve's performance as Superman that I didn't really get before. And I understand how this character works. I think if you'd asked me when I was a teenager, I would have said Superman just basically doesn't work. He has no vulnerabilities, either as a person or as a super being, as a conceit. And so there's nothing fun there. There's no drama there, actually. And now I understand how a Superman story can be told. And I'm excited to see James Gunn tell a Superman story. But I think I would have just snootily said there's no such thing as a good Superman story. Like, it's just, the comics have moved past that. It was the first, and they forgot to include anything to humanize him, and it was dumb. But I don't feel that way now. That's just my history with the character. Obviously, I did weirdly grow up watching Superman 4 many, many times. I don't know if we owned a VHS or something. I've seen Superman 4 a lot. And Superman 4 is obviously a famously derided movie. Really bad. But I thought it was cool when I was 5. He fights Atomic Man. They fight on the moon. I mean, it's just the corniest stuff. You can find YouTube clips if you haven't seen it. It's really bad. But I thought it was cool when I was 5. I also thought lots of things were cool when I was 5.
I think I saw that one when I was like 11 for the first time. And I was like, this is so boring.
It's really bad.
But at 5, I could see. Yeah. I saw Superman 3 and like that when I was a kid, unfortunately.
I've never seen Superman 3 all the way through.
Well,
I've seen some clip that the internet likes to bring up as, this horrified me when I was a kid, where a woman gets turned into a computer. I've seen that clip a billion times because it makes the rounds on Twitter every once in a while, along with other sort of, what was the scariest thing that scared you when you were a kid? So, whatever. Superman. It's really sad what happened to this franchise, but we'll have plenty of time to talk about that. Jake, your super history.
I grew up with Superman. My strongest memories of Superman are before my parents' divorce. So Superman was just a big part of this particular Superman. It was a big part of my childhood, I guess.
Like Superman, the movie specifically.
Yeah, the movies. Yeah,
one.
I was never a comic book geek. I never did any of that stuff. I thought that was for losers. And so never, ever, ever have read a comic book in my life. Not a graphic novel, none of that stuff. Just kind of always made fun of the kinds of kids who did. But Superman, these movies, I identified very much with my dad as a kid growing up. I'd wear red cowboy boots around the house and had Superman pajamas and stuff like that. Would get up on the back of the sofa and pretend I was flying. Dad was at that time was a police officer, so I identified. And who shared some just physical, just like if you look at pictures of my dad from that time and Christopher Reeve, there's a lot of just physical similarities, just in dark hair and the glasses and a good physique. And so just sort of like identified him with my dad. So I loved those movies for that reason. It was just a father-son sort of thing for us. And I hate the Snyder version of Superman. I think Nathan goes off and craps all over that Guy Ritchie King Arthur because it's not Arthur.
Right.
I don't care if it's a good movie or a fun movie. It's not Arthur, and I hold Arthur special, and so it's not allowed to be good. Mm-hmm. I feel about that way, or have felt about that way about what Snyder did with Superman. I don't care that it's a good spectacle. It's not Superman, so
totally fair.
Kind of
I mean, also, even on its own terms, it's a bad movie.
Yeah, there's nothing. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's anything redeeming about it, and there's plenty of other places to get spectacle. So I just don't care.
I would only quibble with one thing. I think the opening sequence on Krypton with Russell Crowe is awesome.
That may be true. I might have been there for that much, but you get to the point, like, I don't know when I checked out of that movie, but
probably somewhere around the time when the
Kevin Costner goes running for the dog.
Well, there was that, but then there's also just, and I realize some of these seeds are in the Lester movies at the very least, but there's like the truckers being boorish and slapping the waitress on her behind and stuff, and then Superman has destroyed his truck. Like the guy walks outside and there's just a lot of, as we like to say, othering, and
yeah, it's very
Superman's mean and broody.
It's mean and passive aggressive and just not sort of like, I maybe rediscovered is that I love
Christopher Reeve.
Yeah, just Christopher Reeve is awesome. Like his portrayal of Clark Kent is super fun and sweet, and his portrayal of Superman is sweet for the most part. It does have edge in places that you don't remember or that you like gloss over.
It's not consistent. Like they're not trying to say anything one way or another. They're just doing a thing, and so yeah. There's places where it contradicts itself. But overall, yes, he's the guy that's going to rescue Lois from a helicopter and then say air travel.
Statistically speaking, air travel is still the safest way to fly.
Right.
He's going to do things like that. He's going to say, "Excuse me, sir," when the guy with the gun, you don't want to do that. And he's going to frame it so where he saves the day, catches the bullet, and
gets
also,
Frisky out of the tree.
Yeah, all of it. So that's the Superman I love. The Superman who's going to get the cat out of the tree and who's going to be a bumbling, wholesome farm boy from Kansas, but who's got some real charm and charisma to him too when he turns it on. Watching him flip those switches and watching him do that because he has a code or a higher principle, I think that's what's lovable, or one of the things that's lovable about him as a character. And I mean, we can talk about all kinds of things about him and Lois. It's the same as Indiana Jones and Marion.
Mm-hmm.
It's like there's nothing likable about this person, and there's no reason this person would like. But the movie simply decided, because that's how it's supposed to be, and I guess that's what's true to the comics or whatever. And we need a romance, and so. But
there's so much that doesn't even in the lore that doesn't make sense. Can they be together? I guess so, but also, can they be together? Can they be together? And is he going to just stay the same and she's going to get old and die? There's just questions that probably the comics have answered, but...
Yeah, well, there's two ways to approach like world building and lore. And this definitely falls into at least the way this movie was approached falls into, I think of it as sort of like the George Lucas camp and the Tolkien camp, right? Tolkien is going to actually... When he creates a world, the world's going to have its own internal logic. There's going to be a reason the elf culture developed the way that it did, and elf architecture developed the way it did, and the way that Hobbit culture is going to develop the way it does, and Hobbit architecture is going to develop the way it does, and there are going to be habits and things. And so all of this stuff, when you get to Hobbiton, or when you get to Lothlorien, or wherever you go, it's going to feel like this lived-in world. And if you were to ask Tolkien why any one thing is the way it is, he's got a reason. And then there's the George Lucas school, which is like, I intuitively know what I think is just really cool and fun. And I'm really tapped into my inner kid. And so I just follow my gut intuition and I create things that are maybe arbitrary, but feel fun. And then we can backfill it later. And there's a whole world of world building that follows that school that doesn't have anywhere near the intuition that George Lucas does. So when you get to a movie like this and you get to Krypton, or you get to the Fortress of Solitude, it's like, well, we know this needs to feel foreign. This needs to feel alien. So it needs to feel otherly. And so it's just going to feel really cold and austere. And it has no internal logic. It just feels cold and austere and clean and sterile, because human is new. We needed something to contrast with the grime of 1970s metropolis, New York City.
And the Norman Rockwell, Smallville stuff.
Smallville stuff. And so the obvious, simple, cheap answer is cold and sterile and lifeless.
Yep.
And there's no internal logic to it at all. So even when the Fortress of Solitude is built, like you see Superman like having to like jump or take these awkward steps to get, there's nothing intuitive about it. There's nothing within any kind of internal logic about it. And so it just feels lame. But there's a whole world of people that's at like the level of depth they go to in their world building. It just so happens that Lucas had a sort of magic touch for building things that actually worked on an intuitive level that could be backfilled with its own kind of internal logic down the line. And a lot of comic books develop that way.
I also think Lucas was just enough of an academic that he read
right.
Joseph Campbell, and he's like, how can I tap this into the most primal sort of fairy tale thing?
Well, and he ripped off people.
Yeah.
He ripped off Dune. He ripped off
Kurosawa.
He ripped off all kinds of other people who actually did the legwork.
Yeah.
And so there was that, and then there was his inner kid, and there was all that sort of thing. And I forget why I'm going here, but I think that there's a thinness to levels of this movie, both in terms of characterization and world building. But some of it really works well, and it has to do with just contrast.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's Christopher Reeve that is, I think maybe was my only point. Christopher Reeve's portrayal of Superman, that's the thing.
He holds it all together for sure.
And he holds it together. And part of why that works is the background.
Mhm.
Well, Donner's not, I mean, I'm sure you'll get into this, but Donner's not an auteur like Lucas. Like, Donner's not creating Superman, obviously. He's
Right.
just using
Right.
him, and then he's a studio guy who was a decent craftsman who can put things together, but this is a movie with a big committee and a big production committee and all kinds of pressures going into it, like you already
I think that's
mentioned.
true, and we'll get to this. I think Donner is actually the hero, and I think Donner actually, left to himself, would have made a more consistent film.
Mhm.
I think the villains, as we'll talk about in detail, are Alexander and Ilya Salkind, the producers of this film, who
Cool.
don't care about the lore, just want it. I mean, they are responsible for everything that we hate in the sequels after they canned Donner and brought in Lester, who's just a comedy guy. They have a really campy sense of who Superman is, and they don't care. And I think Donner actually has a decent respect for the mythology, as we'll talk about. And you might actually accuse Donner of some of the boring stuff on the front end. Like, Donner wants to spend time in Krypton because he wants it to have the weight. And so it's like you combine Donner's sense of, well, this actually does have to have gravitas and it has to make sense, with the Salkinds not caring and saying, get the movie done. And you have a movie that spends a lot of time setting up stuff that ultimately
Don't go anywhere.
doesn't go anywhere and feels thin.
You have 45 minutes of set dressing and backdrop, and then now we're into a totally different story. And I guess it does work to tell, it is an origin story movie, and you're going to have that sort of thing. And breaking a superhero origin story, being the first to do it, was always going to present its challenges.
Yeah, there's a lot that we can forgive this movie for, but that doesn't really translate across the years very well. But yeah, I do agree with you. Ben Donner also, he's a craftsman. He doesn't have some big innate vision of this thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
In any case, is that all the baggage, super baggage that we
Sure.
I
have?
think so.
Okay, so Ben, you're going to take us on a super journey across through the creation of Superman.
Oh, boy.
Let's remember.
Dun, 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 dun.
One of the great 20th century American, I mean, Coca-Cola, Charlie Chaplin, Superman, Shell Oil. I know I'm saying the most obvious thing, but this is an icon. This is part of our collective American myth. And it's important. It's important to how we understand ourselves and how we think of ourselves, how we think of heroes, how we think of the 20th century, how we think of the 30s, the 40s, all the way through. And the way our view of him changes is important to track. So
It says a lot about us.
I think that's an obvious thing to say, and it'll be obvious in what Ben's talking about. But I just want to say that from the very front, in case anyone's like, "Why are they going into?" It's because it's actually pretty important. That I'd say knowing who Superman is, you could argue, is more important than knowing who Odysseus is, who was created 400 or 4,000 years ago. Superman, he's about how we think of ourselves. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm going to give the history of DC as I go as well, because DC and Superman, DC Comics, they go together.
Yes.
So, start right out. DC. It's not called DC at first. It's National Allied Publications. In 1934, it's founded by a guy named Major Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson. And this guy's an entrepreneur. He wants to get into the comics business. First up publication is called New Fun, the Big Comics Magazine.
New Fun?
New Fun. Marvel is going to, when you'll hear this when we talk about Marvel Comics in our Spider-Verse episode, but Marvel, it starts out as something called Timely Comics, and superheroes are not what either company is going to do right at first. Westerns, adventure comics, funnies. But, National Allied hires a couple guys named Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster to create their famous DC character we've all heard of, Dr. Occult. In 1930, I'm going to keep doing this, folks. I hope that you think it's really funny. I'm just warning you. So 1935, also known as the Ghost Detective, also known as Dr. Mystic,
Can I just say, Dr. Occult, the Ghost Detective sounds awesome.
Right? It's actually cool.
I want to read about him.
Well, this character is still around, investigates occult mysteries, wears a fedora and so on. Apparently, the earliest DC superheroes to survive to the modern day.
You did not have to say that he wore a fedora. I knew Dr. Occult wore a fedora.
Did you can picture him?
I mean, I
sounds like you already did. If you look him up, he will look just like you imagine. So he wasn't. I call him the first, or they call him. Someone calls him the earliest DC superhero. He's not fully superhero-ish, right? Not like archetypally a superhero like Superman is going to be. Anyway, so Wheeler Nicholson, he's still going. He creates Detectives Comics magazine soon after with its famous character, Slam Bradley. I told you I'm going to keep doing this. Slam Bradley was also created by Siegel and Schuster. Jerry Siegel, by the way, writer. Joe Shuster, illustrator. So Major Wheeler Nicholson forms Detective Comics Inc. He's like creating all these different brands and subsidiaries and companies, and this is how the comics and publishing business is at the time. It's just all these splintery things and this whole knot of relationships. But
all these stories start with an entrepreneur, by the way. They always start with an entrepreneur. They never start with some guy grew up and he just had a vision to create the...
Walt Disney?
Precisely.
Well, this entrepreneur is not very good at what he does. He's just not very good at it. Major Wheeler Nicholson. He has debt problems. He has cash flow problems. So he's forced to take on some partners. One is his printer and distributor, Harry Donenfeld, who's Jewish. And also Harry Donenfeld's accountant, Jack Leibowitz, is also Jewish. By the way, Jerry Siegel is Jewish. Joe Shuster is Jewish. Major Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson, not Jewish. Well, we'll come back to this, but he's eventually forced out of Detective Comics because he's not good at this. He's in debt. Meanwhile, his National Allied company goes bankrupt, and Detective Comics, which is now owned by Leibowitz and Donenfeld, they buy up National Allied, and Detective Comics is where we get the name DC, right? Basically. So Detective Comics now is this bigger thing, and it starts a new magazine, Action Comics. Action Comics #1. We get the OG of superheroes, I think you could say. That's right. It's Zatara. All right. I'm done. It's Superman, of course. Zatara, I think, is in there. Zatara is like a stage magician superhero. Also still around.
Him, like in front of a crystal ball, like a turban.
No, not a turban, but he looks like a top hat stage magician guy.
Yeah.
But no, it's Superman. Siegel and Schuster create him. His first appearance, Action Comics #1, 1938. He's on the cover. Makes history. Lois Lane appears in the same issue, and so does some unnamed planet of Superman's origin, later to be named Krypton. And it's a big seller. Superman's just a big seller. Right away, from here on out, Detective Comics Incorporated is going to be successful financially. So who were these guys? Right? Jerry Siegel, Joe Shuster. How did they come up with Superman? Well, they were friends. They're children of Jewish immigrants. They met in high school in 1932. They just start creating stuff together. Siegel's like, I want to write. Schuster's like, I want to draw. I want to illustrate. They love pulp stories like Tarzan and John Carter of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs, both of them. Love comic strips. They loved the famous Little Nemo comic, if you guys have ever looked at that.
Never understood it. Never understood why people liked it. It's very strange and hard to get into, for me at least. But
it's strange and surreal, but one thing it is gorgeous.
It is gorgeous, yeah.
It's crazy. Listener, if you've never seen it, look up a panel online or something. It's quite striking. And like Nathan said, what in the world? They love adventure sci-fi movies. Joe Shuster is into fitness, the artist. He's into fitness. He collects fitness magazines to use as reference points for his art, right? So you can see all these influences coming into Superman. In 1933, which I guess is just out of high school, Siegel has his self-published magazine called Science Fiction, The Advanced Guard of Future Civilization. So that's the name of his self-published magazine. And Shuster illustrates it. He writes a story called The Reign of the Superman, which is about a homeless bum who gets pulled into this experiment by an evil mad scientist to take an experimental drug, and this bum gets all these telepathic powers, and he uses them for evil. He kills the mad scientist, and he's going to take over the world, but then the powers wear off, and he realizes, I'm going to be going back to the breadline, and I guess crime doesn't pay as Superman. So that's the story. There's not many copies of this magazine left, as you might imagine. These guys turn to comics next, and they want to make it work. They want to make money. They're poor, and Siegel thinks, hey, what if we had a Superman thing who was good instead of bad? I bet he could make a cool hero. And they go through several iterations of a Superman concept. He's a science experiment like the bum, but instead of telepathy, he gets bulletproof skin and he fights crime. He's a scientist and adventurer from a distant planet. He's the child of a dying Earth sent back to our time by the last surviving man. They're trying to sell the Superman concept to newspaper publishers. That's where they think the money is. Newspapers are not having it, and they're like, this isn't really sensational enough. Then they come up with a comics magazine version. They shop that around. That doesn't work either. Siegel starts thinking, maybe I need an artist with some name recognition instead of my friend who's good, but no one knows who he is. So he starts quietly looking around for artists. Schuster finally finds out. He's like, dude, forget it. You do your own thing. They still work together, but he's like, I'm not helping you with Superman anymore. Just whatever. That doesn't work out. Siegel finds some interested artists and they shop it to their publishers, but it just doesn't work. Finally, on all this time, at some point in here, they're hired by our dude who flops out of the comics business, Major Wheeler Nicholson, and they're creating strips for him. And he's interested in Superman. He's like, hey, I'll publish it. And they're like, this guy sucks as a businessman. He doesn't even pay us on time for our work. Like, Superman is our baby. We're not giving him our baby. But when he finally falls out of the business and the new owners have it, and it's clear, like, these guys know what they're doing, they're finally like, well, at least someone will publish him. We're exhausted trying to find someone to publish Superman. So, okay, you can publish him. And then a star is born. And everything I mentioned earlier goes into Superman. Tarzan, John Carter, movie heroes played with lots of cool, like Douglas Fairbanks, who plays Zorro in Mark of Zorro. They create the dual identity of Superman, partly based on Zorro, partly based on like the Scarlet Pimpernel, partly based on Harold Lloyd, the silent film star who wears glasses.
Looks a lot like Clark Kent.
Looks a lot like Clark Kent, is very meek, very mild, but then you trigger him, you get him in the right situation, and he starts climbing buildings and like being incredibly aggressive to do whatever needs to be done. Then, of course, you got the strongman physique of Superman. Well, Schuster's got all this fitness iconography in his brain. Superman's face is based on the face of Johnny Weissmuller, the most famous actor to portray Tarzan. The city of Metropolis gets its name from the famous German expressionistic sci-fi film Metropolis. These guys are just immersed in pop culture, just pulling everything in to create something that would become itself like a wellspring of pop culture. And by the way, the name Superman, it comes from Nietzsche, right? But it was apparently common at the time to call people a Superman. There's no evidence that these guys read Nietzsche. People would say things like, or write things like, that politician is a Superman. That athlete is a Superman. So it's a measure of Siegel and Schuster's success that when we hear the word Superman, we only think about Friedrich Nietzsche and his books. I'm just kidding. We only think about Superman.
Right.
1938, Superman debuts. It's only a year later the Detective Comics number 27 introduces Batman, one of the other most famous, most financially successful superheroes of all time, created by Bob Kane and Bill Finger. And this is going to shock you, listener, but Kane and Finger they're Jewish. All of these guys who successfully pilot DC, create Batman, create Superman, are Jewish. When we talk about the new Spider-Verse movie and Marvel Comics, you'll see a heavy Jewish influence there. Marvel is successful because of Jews. Comics is a Jewish-dominated industry. There's another Jew in our supercharged history of DC who's waiting in the wings. I want to introduce him now. His name is Max Gaines. He created this 4-color pamphlet for publishing comics that's the direct ancestor of the modern comic book magazine format. He also created a comics line you've never heard of called All American Publications, and he did it in partnership with the owners of Detective Comics, and so his comics line acts basically like a subsidiary of DC. So he's going to originate superheroes like the Atom and the Flash, Green Lantern, Hawkman, and Wonder Woman, which he'll co-create. And eventually those guys get subsumed by DC, like that his company gets bought out and those guys get subsumed. Fun little tangent here. All American Comics had a comic book called Picture Stories from the Bible. And Max Gaines, after he sells the rights to all his other stuff to Detective Comics, he retains the rights to that. He's like, I'm going to start a new company. I'm going to call it Educational Comics. EC Comics for short. And I'm going to, I'm going to quote, market comics about science, history, and the Bible to schools and churches, according to Wikipedia. But actually, EC Comics is known for other stuff because Max Gaines dies in a boating accident. His son William takes it over in 1947 and starts publishing edgy horror stories and starts saying EC actually stands for Entertaining Comics, guys. Publishing sci-fi stories with a political or social angle. Stories known for twist endings, really good artwork, often gruesome. It gave us Tales from the Crypt, for example. If you've ever heard of Two-Fisted Tales, That was a war comic that was anti-war, or at least not pro-war. These were quote-unquote mature comics, for better or worse. They also give us Mad Magazine. And Nathan, you've read some of these things.
Yeah, I used to have several omnibuses of Tales from the Crypt, of Vault and Fear, and stuff like that. The artwork is absolutely gorgeous. The stories are pretty juvenile. It's always just like some guy is a jerk for 2/3 of the story so that he can get a really poetic, gory comeuppance. Probably the most famous one is called Foul Play, and it's about a baseball pitcher that wants to go far, and so he poisons his rival. And then the team gets wind of the fact that he's murdered somebody, and they're like, we're going to deal with this our way. And then the final panels are this incredibly gruesome thing where they're all playing baseball, but it's like his organs are the bases, and they've got an arm for a bat, and they're using the skull as the ball. And the story again called Foul Play. And so you spend like this boring 2/3 of the story with the guy like, ha ha ha, being a jerk, murdering somebody. And then you get to this incredibly over the top. I don't know if you were going to talk about this or not, but EC Comics and Tales from the Crypt and all that is directly responsible for the moral panic of comics in the 1950s and the eventual Comics Code.
I wasn't going to talk about this.
Just like the ratings board, Hollywood was afraid, the government's going to censor us, so we better start censoring ourselves. So they developed the ratings board, which we've talked about on this podcast before, or the censorship, the Breen office, which later became the MPAA, all that. But comics did the same thing. So you see any comic from the Golden Age, and it'll have this little stamp on it that says approved by, I forget what it's called, the comics.
Approved by the Comics Code or something like that.
The Comics Code, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I remember those stamps.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
And that just means we're self-censoring. So Tales from the Crypt actually died, or there's an incredibly lame run of horror comics through the 60s and 70s when they couldn't do anything cool because parents had been outraged by things like Foul Play, which is, again, incredibly gruesome, very silly. Stephen King read all these comics when he was a kid. He is the direct heir of this kind of stuff. Just the idea, they are influential in the horror field. I realize it's a total tangent, but just we're going to take vampires out of Transylvania, and it'll be like a guy in small town America walks into a diner and there's a bunch of vampires, and they've got straws in people's necks and stuff like that. It combines kind of everyday Americana with gruesome horror tropes in a way that was really influential for a generation. So anyway.
Yeah, that's cool. Well,
it's terrible.
Awesome. It's gross. It's awesome. Yeah. So I'll go back to the main storyline now. Our main storyline. So when Siegel and Schuster agree to let DC have Superman, they sign over the rights. And that's just what was done at the time. They're going to regret it later. But in the meantime, they have this 10-year contract with DC to write and draw it. And they're well paid. And you should remember this as I tell you more of their story. By the end of their contracted time at DC, together they had earned $400,000, which adjusted for inflation is about $6.5 million. So they were doing pretty well. Superman quickly gets himself a newspaper strip, 1939. That's where we meet Jor-El and Lara. And Action Comics keeps going with Superman stories. They introduce Superman's first big recurring villain, the Ultra Humanite, a terrifying villain that you no doubt know is a crippled old man who's a super genius. And, and then Superman gets his own comic book very shortly after, which was not a thing that superheroes got at the time. That was just not what you did. You publish them in these omnibus things like Action Comics, where they're alongside other stories. But he gets his own, because DC is making bank, and DC starts branching out into other media. So they've got a radio show that runs from 1940 to 1951. I've never heard this show, but I'm curious now because it's got 2,088 episodes that range from 15 minutes to a half hour long. 2,088 episodes. It's super popular. It's aimed at kids. This show gives us a bunch of stuff that we think of as basic Superman, like his ability to fly in episode 2. Gives us Perry White and Jimmy Olsen and Kryptonite. Superman meets Batman and Robin for the first time on the show. It famously did an episode sometime later in its run where Superman battles the Ku Klux Klan, which apparently really worked. I mean, this is the lore anyway. It really worked as negative marketing for the KKK.
Like nobody liked the KKK?
Right, yeah.
Superman.
That's what I mean. Because it included information from this Klan infiltrator, a guy named Stetson Kennedy, who's a famous civil rights activist he went into the KKK as one of them, like a narc. He gave the Superman radio show like information about their rituals and code words, stripped away some of the mystique that made them feel cool. So the lore is that it was a blow that Superman struck against the KKK.
And dun, 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 dun.
Yeah. And by the way, 1940 is the time when DC starts calling itself Superman DC. Superman DC. And then eventually just DC. But that wasn't their official name until 1977. So, for what that's worth. Now, DC also makes an animated series that runs from 41 to 43, 1941 to 1943, produced by Fleischer Studios, which is this awesome Art Deco thing that I don't know why I never saw any of them. I just watched a couple clips. Did you guys grow up with that?
There was some Art Deco style cartoons that I did watch. They're in color.
Yeah, that's
These
right.
would be beautiful.
These.
Yeah, really nice
Yeah.
looking, really fun. Superman does dorky things like if he's got to fight some scientist who's got a laser beam, he's going to have to punch the laser all the way back, like.
Yeah, that's the
That
clip
sort
that
of
I
thing.
just watched.
They're amazing. I mean, they
Yeah.
are works of cinematic art. They are
Yeah,
worth.
they're
You
really
can
fun.
find 4K versions on YouTube now.
Yeah.
Of at least some of them. They might arguably be the best visual Superman. That's probably just me being a dork, but
Yeah.
they're short and they're not biting off more than they can chew. You can definitely argue that there's no perfect Superman movie, which I'm sure we're going to be talking about here shortly. But these things are perfect little encapsulations of Superman, and they're just Art Deco. Like that dumb movie Sky Captain and the World of
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow. That guy was really trying to do
What's it called again?
Fleischer.
Fleischer Studio, like if you get Fleischer, Fleischer. I didn't grow up watching these. I don't know why. I did watch a clip. I was like, what in the world? It had a massive budget for the time.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, right?
Yep.
I mean,
these are
it's
the ones that we watch.
Well, its budget, these are 10-minute shorts, right? Its budget was $50,000.
Yeah, so you could like pick up a VHS of these for
Yeah.
super cheap.
That's
Yeah,
right.
I think I had.
That's right.
And so we had just a couple
Yeah.
of VHSs of these.
I think they may
yeah.
have fallen into the public domain for a while. So
I think they still are.
It's kind of like Betty Boop or something, where you'll just find these weird compilations of them.
Yeah.
And Betty Boop also is Fleischer.
Is
by the way.
Fleischer, yeah.
And they had the little score they had is something that Williams plays on.
Well, one of the things that people said about when Williams was hired to do this score is he'll never beat the music that we all associate with Superman, which is
This.
that score,
Yeah.
which is quite good.
That's cool.
Well, he won.
Yeah,
so.
he did win that one.
Yeah, he won. So I was saying, this is $50,000, which it's the modern equivalent of paying more than $700,000 for a 10-minute short, per short.
Mm-hmm.
There are, let's see, 17 of these, if I got the number right.
Sounds right.
Yeah. So the first 9 are like fantasy sci-fi, like what you want from Superman. The last 8 are World War II propaganda. Superman foils the Nazis and the Japanese. Hitler makes a brief appearance in one of them, apparently. And Fleischer, like you said, they do. That's the brothers, Max and Dave Fleischer. Guess their ethnicity. Yeah, they're
German.
Jewish. They're German, yeah. They're Jewish. They did, Betty Boop, Popeye. They did the animated Gulliver's Travels feature film, which I think I've seen.
I've seen at least some
kind
of
of dull.
it. Yeah,
It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
Insanely, like Betty Boop. People think of her as a little sex pot, whatever. But those cartoons are crazy, creative, kind of scary from the id.
Yeah, they are weird.
I think we've had some opportunity to talk about
We
them
have.
on this show before.
We
I
have.
forget why, but
We did.
These guys were geniuses in their way.
Yeah. Speaking of World War II, Jerry Siegel gets conscripted in 1943, becomes a reporter for a military newspaper in Honolulu. During his time away, DC, of course, continues to make bank with Superman. He comes back in 1946 feeling cheated out of royalties from Superman stuff like the radio show, crazy successful radio show. And also he finds that in his absence, the DC's created a Superboy comic based on his concept, which he pitched, but they never bought, so they don't have the rights to it. So Siegel's like, okay, Joe, let's sue these guys. So Siegel sues them for Superboy, and then Siegel and Schuster together sue for the rights to Superman, which they can't get because they signed a contract that clearly, explicitly signed away the rights. But DC settles with them for some cash and for the rights to Superboy. And then DC is like, we're removing your byline, created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. That's gone now. Siegel and Schuster try to write one more comic together, apart from DC, called Funny Man in 1947. The satirical, spoofy sort of a take. And it fails. Siegel takes jobs here and there. He slips into relative poverty. Schuster, meanwhile, he draws this and that and slips into relative poverty. He draws some horror and some degraded stuff. His eyesight starts to get bad. In 1948, DC produces their first live-action adaptation of Superman, which is a movie serial starring Kirk Allen. It's really successful. And George Reeves appears first, who we all think of as the proto-Superman, the right before Christopher Reeve Superman. He appears in the next live-action production, which is this 1951 B movie called Superman and the Mole Men, which is a lead up into the famous TV series that runs from 52 to 58. So in 59, Jerry Siegel goes back to write for DC. He needs a job. He's writing with no creative control, and he's let go in 1966 when DC finds out that, what do you know? Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster are planning a second big lawsuit to get the rights to Superman. DC's like, we don't have any more work for you, Jerry. And then Siegel and Shuster lose that lawsuit too and goes into financial hard times again. So DC keeps pumping out the Superman animated shows. You've got The New Adventures of Superman, the awesome Super Friends show made by Hanna-Barbera, 1974.
Disclaimer, not awesome.
Yeah, that's right. Completely not awesome. In 1975, Siegel hears about the upcoming Superman movie. Oh, they're going to make a big one with Christopher Reeve. And he and Schuster make it public. Hey, we're not doing well. DC hasn't treated us well. DC's like, we do not want this negative press. We tried to make the Superman movie. They're like, look, if you guys will just shut up from now on and stop contesting the copyright that you signed away, we'll give you a $20,000 a year lifetime stipend. So they take the deal. Later that becomes $30,000. And then DC, again, thinking of the negative press, they restore the byline, like created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. And that's really just about the end as far as our creator heroes are concerned. I mean, they die in relative poverty. Shuster dies $20,000 in debt in 1992. DC pays that off with an agreement that Schuster's heirs will get nothing from future royalties of Superman. You just can't make this up.
Lex Luthor himself.
Siegel's heirs, on the other hand, they have some kind of arrangement that gives them money from DC on a regular basis. I don't know how much, but Siegel, he kept writing comics here and there. He wrote a little bit for Marvel Comics too. Created the villain Plant Man. He died. He died in 1996. Da 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 da. Copyright. It's important. So that's the unpleasant tale of those guys and their lives, which I don't know. It's they successfully create this amazing icon, pop culture wellspring, and then they just become like they act. It's hard not to feel like they're just acting like parasites for the rest of their lives. Mm-hmm. I know it's sadder than that and whatever, but I don't know.
Well, imagine if you created the pop culture icon and then you didn't profit from it.
I know.
But you sold it.
Yeah,
but you sold it fair and square. You didn't know what it was going to be.
It's just the risk that everybody takes with anything they create at a certain point. It's like, well, you don't know how it's going to end. You don't know how it's going to go. Do I take the cash now while I feel like it's hot, or do I hold?
Yep.
And part of why it was probably able to take off the way it did is because DC, they had it. They could pump it. They could do what they wanted with it. And they weren't going to do that with somebody else's property if they didn't have the rights to it. So
yeah.
It's just like,
it makes sense.
It's just the way that it...
No, I see both sides. I always like the stories of George Lucas losing money initially on Star Wars, keeping the rights, getting the merch right. Like when somebody's farsighted like that, that's always fun.
I like that too.
And then it's also fun. It's also sweet sometimes when you see, this is kind of a weird example, but New Line Cinema had the rights to Freddy Krueger, who Wes Craven created. And Wes Craven did the first movie, and then they did a bunch of sequels. They made a bunch of money. He was the horror star of the 80s, as I'm sure we remember. And then eventually the Bob Shea, who owned New Line and is responsible for Lord of the Rings and all that stuff, he went to Wes Craven and was like, hey, I'm going to write you a check because even though I don't owe you anything legally, you've built my
kingdom.
You've built my kingdom. And can you come back and do a movie for us? And Wes Craven did Wes Craven's New Nightmare and profited from Freddy Krueger. And it was a nice story, and they were all friends. And I like those kinds of stories a lot.
That didn't happen here.
Right. Better than terrible stories of people making the wrong choice and suffering.
Yeah, and apparently they just sunk all their money into who knows what.
Funny man.
I don't know. They made a lot of money at first, and then it's just too bad.
I'm sure some of our listeners will be familiar with Michael Chabon's fictionalized novel version of a lot of this, The Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, which is a good novel minus some gay stuff that comes out of nowhere. It's about 2/3 of the way through, but an interesting version of this.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, it is a cool novel, except for that stuff. Yeah.
Maybe I'll read it on the bookending, except for that
like,
stuff killed it.
Yep.
Oh, I didn't really remember you guys were going to do that.
We were.
It was on a list, and then we killed it.
I read it ahead, and I was like, and I don't know if I'd actually make the same decision now, but at the time, I felt like,
But we can revisit it.
yeah, maybe we will. In any case, yeah. Anything else?
That's it.
Can we take a moment to talk about the Jewish of it all? Because I was just scrolling across tweets today. You know, I'm on Twitter. I'm on conservative Twitter. And so I was just scrolling across tweets today saying how the Jews are controlling our nation and degrading us on purpose. And they hate Anglo-Protestant America, and they control all of our news corporations and our blah, 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 blah. So why do I bring that up? That is not what I'm saying here. But what is interesting is that, and I'm sure we've talked about this before on the podcast, is that Jewish identity is
the American identity, the American dream. And it is because, so I first got clued into this in my early 20s. I was just sort of like had the veil pulled back. I was recovering from surgery, and I, for whatever reason, was watching PBS, and it was this documentary about Broadway. And instead of it being a Jews have shaped the American narrative, the 20th century American narrative, and it's a horrible conspiracy, it was a celebration of how Jews have shaped the American narrative, and it's a wonderful, beautiful thing.
Right.
And it was just a documentary on PBS about the kinds of things that people act like is a conspiracy theory, but it's just the facts. All of early Broadway, all of early cinema and modern cinema, and the comic book industry.
Which all of early Broadway means not just Broadway, but the American songbook. I mean, Irving Berlin, the Gershwins, like...
all of it. And so all of these stories, and so then you have these stories of the outsider are all coded Jewish experience type stories. And the only one that that I can think of that's even explicitly Jewish is Fiddler on the Roof, which comes down the line. But it's all coded outsider stories. So you have the immigrant experience, you have the Jewish outsider experience, and then that gets translated to the reason why the leap is made to degeneracy is because it gets translated to gay coding and things like that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But all of the early shapers of what we know as Americana were in fact Jews.
Bob Kane, who invented Batman, his name is Robert Kahn. He just went by Bob Kane.
Mm-hmm.
George Gershwin is Gershowitz. It's always that. Spiegel and Schuster just happen to sound a little...
So everything that we
Jewish.
think of as just like traditional America, whether it's Superman, whether it's Broadway, whether it's like just the American songbook, behind the scenes of all of that, you have Jewish artists and creators.
Right. Well, and so without saying that every Jew is trying to corrupt, what I think you can say is the people that make our myths are self-consciously finding themselves or defining themselves in opposition to Anglo-Protestant America.
While trying to appeal and profit off of Anglo-Protestant America.
Right.
At the same time. So like that whole idea of we are outside of this and opposed to it, and it's opposed to us. But if we position ourselves in such a way as to subvert it,
mm-hmm.
and to Trojan horse ourselves and our own stories, we win. That's embedded in the DNA of the entire entertainment industry, top to bottom, since the very earliest days of the 20th century.
Yeah, and I don't know, there's a sense in which I feel the same way. Like I do not define myself as a member of the Anglo-Protestant mainstream.
Right.
I think it's one of the reasons why their stories are powerful is because nobody actually thinks they're part of the club. Everybody feels like an outsider, right? To some degree or another. Even if you're a wasp princess, you don't feel like you're part of things. Everybody identifies with the outsider. But people like Zack Snyder is so hammy, and Superman Returns was so hammy with the Christ imagery, the Superman, like he'll be doing kind of the stigmata pose or whatever. But actually,
it's Moses.
It's Moses. It's the baby in the basket. That is Superman.
Now, of course, the reason that translates to Jesus is because Moses is in fact a type of Christ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is so hilariously ironic that
They can't help but tell Christ stories.
They can't help but tell Christ stories when they tell Moses stories, and yet they refuse to connect the dots to Jesus.
Right. But the filmmakers don't. I mean, the filmmakers have Jor-El say, I have sent my only son.
Right. Because everybody understands the connection. The Moses story is a prefigurement and a type of the Jesus story. Everybody understands that. It's just there. And that's why Jesus says some of the things that he does.
Right.
And why Paul does too.
As typology, as semiotics, Superman is a very benevolent. He does stand outside of, let's say, Protestant Anglo culture, but he also is the savior of it. So it's a very nice, as far as Jewish myths go, Superman, I guess you could argue, is a nice one. It is like we need a Moses, or they wouldn't want to say Jesus, but we need a savior that transcends us.
A savior, a transcendent Christ figure.
Who is outside of us.
A Messiah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he cannot be one of us, but he has to fit in with us too if he's going to make his thing work. Like, it's never actually been clear to me why, on a plot level, Superman needs to hide his identity. But just in terms of it feels right, the myth works, it makes sense. Like, they don't even bother explaining it in this movie. You could maybe put it together with his dad saying something or other, but there's no real reason. Nothing can hurt this guy. There's no real reason why.
I would say it's because of the mediator role that he plays. He needs to be able to understand our sufferings like our great high priest. I mean,
but it's also the thing that gets him into trouble.
That's
like,
right.
Jor-El doesn't actually want him to fall in love with one human being.
Mm-hmm.
He's supposed to be able to serve all of humanity.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and if he gets wrapped up, he's going to end up altering human history,
Right.
Which was not just a metaphor for intervention, but apparently a literal alteration of history.
Right. So I think we could talk about the Jewish influence on culture without being accused of being conspiracy theorists, because the Jews would be the first to celebrate it and to agree with us 100%. We would just want to say, yes, we agree with you, but also let's question what was good about this, what was bad about this, and why. And
well, I'll come back to this when we do Marvel context, but you have to remember that comic books are the cutting edge of what's lurid and what draws guys into porn. I say that as a kid who read comic books. I understand the links for me. Into later temptations.
They're so ahead of movies.
That's right. They're ahead of movies. So you just draw the line from like pulp fiction stuff, which is lurid, to comic books, to stuff like men's adventure magazines, which the Jews, at least to a significant extent, had a corner on back in the day. Those men's adventure magazines become today's porn magazines. So all of this stuff is linked. This whole entertainment complex, from the most evil to the stuff that we like the most, is all linked.
Well, okay, this is as provocative as I'll get. There is something a little bit condescending or smarmy about it. There is a little bit of like, hey, Anglo-Protestant America, hey, Anglo-Protestant men, I know what you really want, and I know how I can get you. Sexy lady on the cover. You idiots, you'll buy my magazine. There is that cynicism. And there is that kind of like, you wouldn't let me come through the front door of your culture, so I'm going to take the back door, and I'm going to make you come crawling to me because you made me come crawling to you.
And there's an envy and jealousy.
Yeah.
And the sense of, with that cynicism, that sense of, we tried faithfulness to God.
Mm-hmm. Well,
we tried that.
Let's not forget that all comedy comes from the Jewish experience too. All American comedy comes directly from the Jewish Borscht Belt comedians and all your sort of famous, the Marx Brothers, whatever.
Well, and pop music too.
And pop music.
So who's been a greater contributor to, and let's just take out the producers and everybody else behind the scenes and just say Bob Dylan.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the Jewish comedians, they have riffs on this sort of thing, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, even if they're not great comedians, they're going to talk about. Adam Sandler has a song about this sort of thing, right? That's one of his comedy bits, is he has a song about all the Jews who have shaped everything.
Well, and Spielberg, I mean, we talk about Spielberg all the time, but Spielberg, like, he's the shaper of, you don't have to go back 100 years to see this, like the shaper of our pop culture right now. We're about to see the 5th Indiana Jones movie, like...
Yeah, we're just like, he's the shaper of our childhoods, right? And everything downstream of it, and everything that everybody's trying to imitate today, and that everything that's still paying off today.
Yeah, I mean, where I don't want to go with the conspiracy theorists is
there's some kind of cabal.
Well, and also, if I have a neighbor and his name is Goldstein, I'm not going to assume he's out to get me. And I think it's wicked
Right.
to do so. Like you can make a generalization about a people and about their position in society without therefore assuming that every last person that you run into is the maximum representation.
Yeah.
I
of
grew
that.
up in a very Jewish part of my city at the time. I could walk to the synagogue. And so that a lot of Jewish families lived in my neighborhood. I had a lot of Jewish friends growing up. And some of them were just really great people and really great friends.
Right.
And it's not some kind of one-to-one.
And we wouldn't be doing this podcast if we didn't love their stories and love their sense of humor. I think we have to admit that. The angle that they have on things
Yeah.
is smart and you like it and you hate what's evil about it. But,
Yeah.
But also brilliant
But yeah, and in that sense of just sort of,
and fun.
we are God's people and we're the ones who have suffered. That can get very blasphemous very fast. And I don't even like in Fiddle on the Roof when Tevye is having his little conversations with God. But that basic sort of wry approach to life, like, you know, here I am, I'm trying to do good, I'm trying to make my way, and things fall apart, is something that is so central to our experience, the American experience, the way we look at ourselves, the way we laugh at ourselves. And I just, you know,
And everything we love and identify with about some of our greatest heroes, like it is Indiana Jones. The American hero, as shaped by Jewish identity, is not actually Superman,
right.
for the most part. It is Indiana Jones getting the crap kicked out of him and keep getting back up and doing the right thing. It's Spider-Man, the same thing. Even our superpowered heroes, like what we love about our heroes is not that they are invulnerable. It's that they've overcome something and that they just keep getting back up. It's Rocky, you know, he's going to go down and he's going to get back up. That's what we love about them.
Yep.
What we love about Superman is if we line up the movies that we've talked about in this and we fit Rocky into it, Superman's just the daddy figure. And Rocky and Indiana Jones, they're the everyman, they're the us of it all.
Yeah.
Who can pull through. And Luke Skywalker's the kid, the son, who's got that sort of G-shucks innocence that Superman has. But stuck in between Luke Skywalker and Superman is everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just the guy who gets beat down and gets back up and just keeps getting back up. And that's his chief virtue is he doesn't quit. He never stops.
Yes. Yeah, I think I'm trying to decide whether to talk about this now. Yeah, why not? So just in tracing I don't know, did you have anything else you want to say about this before I'm going to move us away a little bit?
Real quick,
Yeah.
just to the extent that they're like, we'll sell you stuff by putting a naked lady on the cover of our comic or whatever. To the extent that anyone does that, you don't think of like just a puppeteer, like, ha ha ha, I have you now, white guy.
Emperor Palpatine.
Right. What you think of is, well, this is also what you want. And you are also a slave to sexual perversion as you do this, even however cynically in a marketing move, is also what you want. You're
Right.
also given over to porn.
Yeah, it's not like you were perfectly virtuous and the golem came crawling out of the mud.
Yeah, that's right.
So let me go ahead and give where I think that particularly Christopher Reeve's Superman sort of lands on the trajectory of these kinds of heroes, more specifically, because I think there is a sort of more waspy male identity that comes out of the sort of John Wayne school. My wife was just watching McClintock not too long ago, and there's a line where he says, "Never apologize, son. It's a sign of weakness." Now, whatever that is, was every man like that? No, but my grandpa who fought in World War II was sure like that. You couldn't go anywhere emotionally with that guy. And I think out of World War II, we have this idea of the man of action who's not interested in feelings and can't really relate to kids or talk to you like you're a human being and are a little scary. And John Wayne, he might punch you and you might learn something, but he's not going to like take you aside and empathize with your feelings or anything like that. He's going to throw you in the water so you can learn to swim.
Yeah.
That's that brand of masculinity.
Yeah, and there's a weird distinction. So, sorry, I'm stuck on Never Apologize, Son. What was the rest of the line?
Never apologize, son. It's a sign of weakness.
Okay, there's a sense in which there's a lot of truth to that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lesson that a lot of men need to learn, but taken too far.
What it means is the good version is don't live your life like you're always apologizing
Yeah, you don't apologize
for existing,
for
being in the room,
existing, for being a man, for
Hey, I'm sorry,
don't surrender your dignity and your power and your authority to people because you feel a need to appease them or make them like you, right? There's that side of things that is the virtue that John Wayne represents, but is not weakness to admit real fault.
Right. And there is something, I think that there was something hollow about the 1950s man that we would not like and we would not want to go back to.
There's a reason why he fell apart.
Right. Yeah. There's a reason why he was subsumed by the sexual revolution, for crying out loud. Like, people did not like their dads actually never apologizing, to wildly generalize. People did not like a man who could not ever, who thought that any show of feeling was
a show of weakness.
Unless it was anger.
Unless it was anger. Like, the only kind of thing that you can feel is aggression. And to do anything else is to be effeminate. And that's not real masculinity. It's not biblical masculinity. It's not David. It's not Jesus. Jesus wept. But that being said, that is the masculine image that is dominant in mid-century art. And then you have the sexual revolution. You have the Beatles. You have the feminization, the embrace of androgyny, long hair, all that stuff on the one hand. And then on the other hand, you have James Bond and Playboy magazine, and they both feel like reactions to that. So you have the Beatles like, oh, we're just rebellious, man, and we've got our long hair, and we're just sexually androgynous, man. And then you have James Bond, who just feels like what? Just cynical.
Well, it's just like, why have any pretense of being a family man and a father if I have no interest in being a father or a family man? I'll just be a womanizer and a badass.
Yeah, why don't I
killer.
take what's fun about
Post
male
John Wayne.
aggression? Well,
It's
and then
Clint Eastwood.
Yeah, well, that's where I'm going with this. Dirty Harry comes out in 1971, and Dirty Harry is such a distillation of the reaction to that, where it's just like, John Wayne is a righteous killer. Dirty Harry likes to kill. Dirty Harry gets a kick out of shooting people. And actually, so does James Bond. James Bond gets his kick out of sleeping around.
Let's just not pretend to have any virtue whatsoever.
Yeah, let's just drop the pretense, guys.
We don't need a hypocrite. Like, why did you bother marrying my mom and having me if you were just going to sleep around and screw whoever you wanted?
And you just like to dominate and destroy and show off your power?
Yeah, just go out and dominate, destroy, and conquer the woman, and don't drop the hypocrisy and the pretense.
Yeah, and so Clint Eastwood's whole career is just, he's spent the last 30 years apologizing for it, but the first part of his career is just that. Just, guys, let's drop the pretense and let's have fun with this. Dirty Harry's a funny character because he admits that's what he is. He gives these great speeches, did I fire 5 shots or 6? Like, I would make my day. He's got a gun to a guy's head. The guy's got a hostage. He's like, please shoot the hostage so that I can blow your head off, because that's my view of human life. Like, the thing that would just make my day is a coffee and blowing your head off, black man. And so there was something very cathartic about that for people. It was also, even then, like, you can find all the think pieces from 1971 with the first Dirty Harry on, where people are just like, this is fascist. This is terrible. This is playing to the worst instincts in us. What happened? And what they don't realize is that, well, actually, our masculinity idea in 1950 with John Wayne was a little hollow, and the response with the sexual revolution was hollow. And so Clint Eastwood's brand of cynicism is just really appealing to people. But then a few years later, I think you have an equal and opposite hero. And I was thinking about this a lot, because Rocky comes out in 76, Star Wars comes out in 77, and the movie we're talking about today comes out in 78. And these characters are obviously, that you couldn't find 3 more different characters in their approach to life than Rocky, Luke Skywalker, and Superman. But I think there is something that makes them all of a type. And I think the thing that I would say about all of them, I came up with a clever term for this. I'll call it boys to zen. You get it, guys? They're appealing because they start out boyish, wear their hearts on their sleeve. They're very affable, and they have emotional access in a way that John Wayne and Dirty Harry didn't. Superman, for all his kind of portentousness, he's got an easy way with himself and with his emotions and with his romance that
Dude's got some charisma.
He's got some charisma.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that John Wayne and Gary Cooper and Cary Grant and Gregory Peck never had. But then you have to ask the question of, okay, we know the world's crap. We know what we really need is for Dirty Harry and James Bond to just unleash their ids, because that's how you survive in this world. So it's like, how can you actually make your way when you're embracing the more, as they would see it, effeminate side of yourself with Rocky, with Luke, with Superman? And I think in all three cases, the answer is you have to become Zen. You have to access a larger part of the universe and become one with it one way or another. And with Rocky, it's just asking the universe to give him what he wants because he believes in it so hard. And with Skywalker, it's literally like he has to learn to use the Force. Like, it's just, the metaphor is just made into not a metaphor. And with Superman, at least in the architecture of what you can see that they were trying to do with these two movies and the Donner cut and everything like that, it's like, yeah, you can have your romance with Lois, and you always will, but you gotta stand for something bigger, and you've got to wash yourself of like specific attachment. It's what gets you into trouble. It's also what, like, there's a sense in which Adrienne is ultimately like a little bit incidental as much as we love her, and Leia ends up being incidental to Luke's journey, and like all these guys have to forego personal happiness one way or another. I realize I'm broadly generalizing, and you can find sort of self-contradictions in these movies, but I think broadly speaking, that was coming out of, so you have John Wayne, and then you have the reaction to that, which is Dirty Harry and James Bond, and then the reaction to that is, well, we're going to have a hero that embraces his feminine side a little bit more, that has more access to his emotions, that wears his heart on his sleeve, that's kind of a more boyish.
Well, it's interesting in contrast to what you're saying. We just talked about Guardians of the Galaxy 3, and that is very different because that is not Zen. That is all found family. That is all specific. If we have a moral code, maybe we do, but it arises because we have a found family, and that's why.
Well, it's kind of like, if you don't actually believe in good, then what is your good? Like, what is it that keeps you, that actually enables you to defeat the monsters and keep them at bay? James Bond, Dirty Harry, they say, you just unleash your own monster. I mean, that's the only way to do it.
In service of what's less monstrous. Western civilization.
In both cases, those guys are appealing because they work for institutions. They're standing up for institutional authority, and the institution is in some sense curbing what's most terrible about them. They're not just pure vigilantes, but they kind of are also. Like, they use the best of their id, but they bring just enough of the other two parts of themselves that they don't just become pure psychopaths. But we realize you need a lot of id to get anything done. And so then you get past that and you're like, okay, you can't actually be a well-integrated, appealing, masculine figure if you're just dirty. Like, Dirty Harry has no life. James Bond ultimately has no life. Like, nobody would actually want to be with these guys or be around these guys. They're appealing for a one-night stand, but what's the relationship that you could actually have with this guy? What's the ongoing relationship that we as an audience can have with this guy? And you have to find different answers. And I think so much of the answer now is found family is what anchors me and gives me purpose and gives me a reason to keep going. Star Wars, I don't think, has had an answer in the new trilogy, which is one of the problems. Like, it just doesn't have anything to say, and just, I guess, found family as much as anything. But where Rey's story goes is really generic. I don't know. The reason, was it on this version of the podcast or one of the discarded ones where I said that all cinema of the male goes back to Ethan Edwards, John Wayne standing outside the door in The Searchers. So the question is always, can the American hero who saves society also be a part of that society? Or do you need to stand above or below or to some side of that society in order to fit in? And mostly the answer is you can't. Iron Man tries, but he dies. Captain America ultimately gives up on it. The Guardians just create their own little family. Superman, we never got a coherent actual Superman narrative. Zack Snyder gave us a coherent narrative, but it's just pure fascism. It's just pure, like, he's actually Nietzsche's Superman. And that's what I actually think is cool as Zack Snyder. Again, I've said this a million times. One of the things I don't like about Harry Potter is that J.K. Rowling's answer to that question is way too easy. She's just like, yeah, Harry can reintegrate. It's fine. He can save the world and then be a part of the world. And I'm like, yeah, I'd like to think that. But That's not usually how the hero's journey goes, and it feels a little weird to me. I know Harry loses a lot of friends, and it's very sad, especially for younger children. But all was well. Just the final scene on the platform just always feels a little bit false to me because Frodo Baggins can't go back to the Shire again, and I'm not sure Harry can go back to Hogwarts. Anyway, that's where I think Superman lands. He's wanting to be a better man than John Wayne. He's wanting to be something more. As much as a lot of people will look back on Christopher Reeve's Superman and say he's just a cheeseball kind of dad figure with nothing to him. I don't actually think that that's what Donner is intending, or certainly not what Reeves. You can find quotes where Reeve is saying, specifically positioning himself against John Wayne. Like he says, like, our ideas of what a man is have changed in the 70s. And so I want to be that kind of Superman, which is really funny because when we look back, when people watch this movie now, they're just like, what an old fashioned idea of manliness. But Christopher Reeve is actually trying to be as cutting edge as he possibly can.
Luke has to get rid of all of his emotions and attachments.
Right. And that's ultimately, if you remember in the Donner cut, it's like Lois and Superman can't be together. Like, that was dumb. He can't do that. He needs to go back to just being Superman. Jor-El was right. So it's the same thing. And Rocky is its own thing. It might be a stretch to include Rocky, but I think Rocky is always playing with that. Adrian would ultimately rather him just be home, but then she needs to support. Rocky always kind of has to empty himself to win.
He can only do it if Adrian's behind him.
Yeah, but he becomes more of a superhero. Like, he is Luke Skywalker in Return of the Jedi by the later films in the series. And the love story kind of doesn't matter. The movies don't actually care. I'm not trying to argue that there's not things in the movies that contradict it. I just think the broad sweep is always like,
give them enough sequels. This is where they have to go. They can't live in the tension of we have a family and we have big principles.
Yeah, nobody actually believes that those two things can go together the way that we as Christian men
Believe
take
that
for
they
granted.
do. Okay.
Everybody always thinks there's tension there.
You either have to be oriented to your code and your mission and screw the family and screw the people, or you have to be oriented to your woman or your family and screw the mission and screw the code.
And the mission is always suspect. Like, at the end of the day,
because the real mission should be the family.
The real mission should be the family, or, yeah, sure, of course, Emperor Palpatine needs to be defeated. But you lose something in the process. To be a warrior is to give up
being a lover.
Is to give up being a lover.
So
there's no such thing as the warrior poet or the warrior lover.
Right.
All samurai movies ever.
And all these movies, I think broadly, we are embracing a more Eastern way of thinking about these things.
And when you say we are embracing, you mean starting in these movies in the 70s. Like, yeah. This is...
George Lucas, he hasn't fully gone there in the first Star Wars, but Luke is such a less appealing character, to me at least, by Return of the Jedi. He just has become this Zen figure, and we're going to shuffle his love interest off with Han Solo, who feels pretty emasculated in that movie. It's like being a lover and being saved by his love kind of makes Han Solo a guy that just steps on twigs and is comedy relief now. In order to, I mean, kids always love Han Solo, but he doesn't even get to be part of the bike chase, for crying out loud. Like, he's just funny. Harrison Ford obviously doesn't care. Like, it's not doing it for her. Anyway, I don't have to talk about Han Solo. It's like they've actually all accepted the Clint Eastwood frame, like that to be a man of action is to engage in something intrinsically bad and intrinsically channeling parts of yourself that are destructive. And so you can zen.
It'll be fun to revisit this conversation when we hit Raimi.
Yeah. 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 Maybe what I should do is...
Because it's very much his conception of Peter Parker.
Right.
Or the tension that the central question he wants to ask and falls apart asking it over and over again.
Yeah, maybe the more useful way for me would have been to frame this, and I framed it this way, but maybe I should have from the very start said, these movies don't actually answer the question. These are just the questions that they're playing with. And I see a sort of, in the 70s, in the late 70s, in the early 70s, I see a shut off, let your inner monster take over. That's Dirty Harry, that's James Bond, 60s, 70s. And for a few dollars more, that stuff is all that, early Clint Eastwood. And then late 70s, I see, well, that's actually not appealing. That's actually not what we want from a man. We want a guy who has some self-knowledge, some self-awareness, some enthusiasm for life, some enthusiasm for love, someone with some emotional integration. But then that begs another question. How can you be that guy and be a successful warrior? And the answer is it's either really hard or you can't. Or, I mean, maybe Rocky is actually appealing because he pulls it off. Rocky, maybe we could argue Rocky is the one hero from all this stuff that manages to integrate that stuff.
I think if you take Rocky or Rocky 1 and 2,
Yeah, I was going to say, at least for a couple of movies.
then he very much feels that way to me.
But the
as
series...
as a totally separate, there's just more heart and more to him as a character than any of these other guys who are playing much more of a blank slate typological role.
But then I do want to push back a little bit and say it is interesting that the series moves past that into typology and kind of Rocky becomes less of the character that we love from 1 and 2 and more of just this
typological superhero.
Right. And even the first movie is playing with the, like, I don't remember whether they actually stop having sex, but they certainly talk about it. He's like, I need to keep myself. There's always some feeling of, like, how do you integrate these things? You can't. You have to. You don't want to give your potency over here when you need to give it over
Now
here.
you're reminding me of Dr. Strangelove.
Well, but that's something as much deeply embedded in sports culture as anything else. Like, you're going to have, like, even if you watch a movie like Bull Durham, they're going to talk about, well, you can't pitch if you've made love. That you can't do that the same day. It robs you of your strength. It takes your legs out. It robs you of your verve and your potency. You have to be all like, it's got to be your sexual energy channeled. So you can't have that. Like, they're going to talk about that explicitly in a movie like Bull Durham, but that's locker room talk.
Mm-hmm.
Like, locker room talk for sports is going to be talking about keeping your girlfriend away for the weekend, keeping her away on game day, no porn or anything like that on game day until after the game. That's locker room talk because there's such a connection with your physical performance, or at least your conception of your physical performance and your verve as a man, your sexual energy, your potency, your strength.
But don't you think that comes out of the same cultural stew that these movies do? Like, for example, Spider-Man.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it's all interconnected, but I also think you can go back to probably warrior manuals from Sparta.
Well, I'm thinking of Uriah not being willing to go to his wife when David summons him home from battle.
Right. It's always something that people have dealt with. It is an interesting Freudian way to frame Spider-Man as just the story of a man who really wants to have sex and doesn't know whether he can fulfill his mission and have sex at the same time. And he's in agony for his entire life about that problem, and he never solves it.
And when he does, he gets impotent in other places. At least that's how Raimi thinks of it.
Well, and now we have a series where we're going to say the black kid can do it, which is hilarious. Although maybe he doesn't end up with a girl. Maybe the black kid actually is Zen, like I've been saying. At the end of the day, we'll find out. But we all kind of think a black kid might be able to do it a little bit better. Maybe that's just the self-hatred that we've been taught. But it's like, I don't know. Miles might have a better shot than Peter.
Well, that's a race frame, but Peter's an orphan and Miles has a family, which is another frame.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I'm intentionally choosing the most base of the frames. Okay, well, we've thrown out a bunch of stuff for you to think about, and we'll keep thinking about it as we go. Let me talk about the making of Superman, which, as I've said before, is a interesting story with heroes and villains. As it came out in 1978, directed by Richard Donner. The tagline was, "You will believe a man can fly." It made $300 million, which is the equivalent of $1 billion or something. This movie made a lot of money. It was also the most expensive movie to its time, which is a joke to talk about now because I think it cost $55 million, which is like the catering budget on a Marvel movie. But $55 million also would have been way more back then. So the story of this movie is the story of why we have comic book movies at all, as I've said, because it was not intuitive to people to make a comic book movie and to make it for adults and to make it on this scale and to spend this much money on it. We needed people with a real vision to do this, or we wouldn't have the entire comic book industry. We wouldn't have action movies. We wouldn't have fantasy movies the way that we have. We have Star Wars to thank for that, which came a year before this movie. But even with the success of Star Wars, people were still just like, Superman is not going to work. So I'm going to very self-consciously cast this as a story of good versus evil. We have our all-American good guy versus our slimeball European villains. And the good guy is named Richard Donner. The slimeball European villains are Alexander and Ilya Salkind. The Salkinds tried to possess and destroy Superman, and it was up to Donner to save him, but it would not be easy. So let me take you back to the early 70s. Star Wars hasn't even come out yet. Nobody is thinking about doing a comic book movie. Comic books are for kids. There's no graphic novels. Like, it's for kids. It's a dumb thing that your kid buys with a nickel and he wastes his time. He could be outside playing. He could be working a job. Instead, he reads comic books. As Ben talked about, there had been some good cartoons of Superman. There had been the cheesy Superman, George Reeve TV show, which is silly. And there had been some serial films of Batman and Superman in the 1940s. But they're all B movies. They're all silly. Nobody is looking at this. I don't think it's possible for us to enter it now into how much people were not looking at this as a thing that was going to work, as a thing that even made sense. Like, they're just like, you have a guy in a red cape with blue tights. Like, we cannot do a serious version. There is no serious version. The one kind of thing that had been done successfully with this stuff that everybody agreed worked was the campy, I think we were just talking about this on an episode, the Batman, 1960s Batman, which embraced pure camp, pure irony. And that show is very clever and very subversive in what it does. But you can also feel the producers of that show just being like, this is what we have to do. Like, we can't, there is no serious version of this stupid story of a Batman with his butler and his car and his supervillains. Like, the only way for us to do this is to find some angle on it that makes it a joke, and little kids can be excited about it. But if we don't find an ironic way to approach this from the side, it's not going to work. And so that's Batman. That's like everything that had come before. The person who, just like sometimes Lex Luthor, he could start a good thing, I guess. He comes to the city and says, I'm going to give energy to Metropolis. It's like one of those plots, but then he's got an evil plan. Well, our slimeball European villains, Alexander Salkind and his son Ilya, were the ones who came up with the idea to do Superman. So we have to give them a little credit for that. Alexander was, what else for our story today? A Russian Jewish-born man who moved to France and became a French independent film producer, by which I mean someone who does not work for Warner Brothers or one of the big studios, but just raises money, makes his own movies, produces them, acts as the studio, and then generally if he has a movie, will make a deal with the studio to distribute it, because it's hard to be your own distributor. But he and his son Ilya were both in the business, and they were known to be shady. There's actually a rule in the Screen Actors Guild now called the Salkind Rule, which basically says it's illegal to do what the Salkinds did to us that one time, because the Salkinds, they produced a movie called The Three Musketeers, based on Dumas's novel in 1973. Great movie with Michael York and Christopher Lee. Charlton Heston plays Richelieu, and it's really fun. All star-studded cast. But it was going to be one of those 4-hour kind of Ben-Hur kind of epics, but somewhere in there they decided, we're just going to split it. We'll make two. We'll make The Three Musketeers and The Four Musketeers. And so all the actors found out as the first movie was premiering, hey, so Charlton Heston, by the way, you actually starred in 2 movies, but we paid you for one, and you're getting royalties for one. And the actors weren't happy. I think they all went after the money from the Salkinds. And this rule, to this day, there's the Salkind rule, which is that if you're going to make a series, you can't hire Robert Downey Jr. to do one Iron Man movie, and then say, we got too much material, we're going to make it 2, unless you go back and renegotiate with him, and then he makes a lot more money. You can see how it would be very easy to misuse a star that way, which is exactly what the Salkinds were famous for doing.
Especially if you're doing something like the MCU or something like that.
Right, exactly.
Like, oh yeah, well.
Yeah, that's why we always hear about this guy has such and such a number of movies left on his Marvel contract or his star. It's like,
And what constitutes an appearance? How many minutes constitutes an
Right.
appearance?
that stuff is all, it's like reading the sports page and like there's so much of it is just, so much of the interest if you follow this is just like the salary negotiations and stuff like that. It's kind of endlessly fascinating if you're into this stuff or if you just like to watch the rich and famous devour each other, which personally I love. So Ilya Salkind the Younger has the idea to do Superman, the cheesy old comic, and they negotiate in the early 70s with DC for about a year to get the rights. And DC's like, we'll let you do it, but we need to know who you're going to cast as Superman. And so they're like, how does Muhammad Ali strike you? And they're like, yeah, cool. Or Al Pacino, or James Caan, or Clint Eastwood, or Dustin Hoffman. And DC's like, okay, that sounds pretty good. So that just goes to show neither the Salkinds nor DC is actually taking this stuff with the reverence that your most basic comic book nerd takes it now. They're just thinking of it in terms of,
If we get a headliner,
yeah, we'll get a headliner.
Al Pacino as Superman.
Yeah.
So it's almost as rich as
Nicolas
Nicolas Cage. Yeah.
Nicolas Cage, yeah. So they get the rights to Superman, and then they make what's called a negative pickup deal with Warner's, which is I'm sorry, I really find the contract kind of stuff pretty interesting. So a negative pickup deal means that the studio agrees to purchase a completed film at a given date and sum. So I have to go as the producer, raise the money myself, make the movie myself. But if I complete it by such and such a time with such and such stipulations, then Warner Brothers agrees to buy it from me. Negative doesn't mean the opposite of positive. It means like film negative. We're going to pick up the film negative from you. So essentially what this means is it's good for the studio because they don't have to assume liability for a production that may or may not work. Like if everything falls apart, they're not going to spend a dime on it. It's good for the producer because I've basically got, as long as I can bring the movie in time under the agreed to stipulations, I've got a post-dated check. Like it'll be paid for. And it would be like if somebody came to Jake and said, I'd like to build a building for Church of the King, but Jake, actually, you need to raise all the money. You need to get the building built. If you get it built by such and such a date, then I'll write you a check for the entire thing. But I'm just not going to front the money up front. I need to see that you can, I don't know why somebody would do that. Although I've heard of things like this in the church world, even the fundraising world, the nonprofit world. And so the good thing about that is you can borrow money against the promise that Warner Brothers, you can go to private investors and say, hey, they're going to pay for everything, but I just need to get the money up front. The bad thing is you better deliver your film or you're going to be stuck with a product that's not finished, no distributor. And so anyway, the Salkinds get that kind of deal. Warner Brothers will buy the film and be a distributor if they can just get it done. The next problem that they have is that, like I said, nobody takes this stuff seriously. So they're like, how can we make this sound like a prestige A picture? So they decide they're just going to spend money up front to get headlines and make this look good. And so immediately they hire that great guy known for his light touch and pop culture savvy, Mario Puzo, our old friend, the author of The Godfather, to write the script. And they're not paying because nowhere has anyone like, oh, Mario Puzo, he's got an angle on Superman. No, it's just like he's got a name that is intriguing. Like, hey, Mario Puzo's Superman. That's interesting. So we're going to pay for that name. And then we're going to pay for two more names and they're going to be the greatest actors of their respective generations. We're going to get Gene Hackman up front. We're going to pay him a couple $1 million and we're going to get Marlon Brando we don't have a script. We don't have an angle. We have got Puzo. We've got the rights to Superman. We've got Mario Puzo as our writer. We've got nothing else but, hey, Brando, for $4 million or whatever, will you lend us your credibility? And Brando's like, yeah, sure. I can buy a lot of donuts with that. So I think that's what he said. So Brando signs on for the biggest payday of an actor up to that point. Obviously, again, now people make a lot more, but $3.7 million plus a hefty, nice percentage of the gross. Puzo writes this giant script, which is 500 pages long. It's supposed to be 2 Superman movies. So they decide to do the Musketeer thing, but they're being upfront about it. They know they can't get away with it twice. So they're hiring everybody to do 2 movies and to shoot them all at once, like Lord of the Rings or something like that. Then they hire a director named Guy Hamilton, who is famous for doing Goldfinger. He was one of the great James Bond directors, to shoot the movie in Italy. The problem is Italy doesn't have nearly the tax breaks that Britain does. And if you haven't caught on, the Sulcans like their money and like to do things successful. They're slimeball European villains. So I'm going to just make this as cut and dried as I can. So they're like, you know what? We actually need to shoot in Britain. Unfortunately, Guy Hamilton is a tax exile. Everybody was a tax exile from Britain. Christopher Lee didn't live in Britain for a long time. Britain's taxes were very tyrannical then, probably still are. But he's not going to go back. So suddenly they are going to need another director for this movie. And so who do they think of? This is one of my Ben-like trick outs.
Yeah. I just wondering who it could be. Hold on.
Remember, this is the mid-1970s.
Coppola?
No, think even more mainstream. Just say the obvious one.
Spielberg.
Okay. So
Okay.
they're like, hey, we should get this Spielberg guy. His Duel thing and Sugarland Express was really good, Ilya Salkind says. Let's get him for Superman. We can get him for the right price. And the dad is like, yeah, let's see. He's got this Fish movie coming out. Let's see how the Fish movie does. If the Fish movie does good, then maybe he can direct our Superman. Well, the Fish movie does pretty well. And then Spielberg after that is not interested in, he's priced out.
He doesn't need any more stepping stones.
Yes, exactly. So they actually had their shot. These guys suck. They had their shot. I'm going to, when we do Superman 2, I'll try and tell more of the story from their point of view, because maybe they have, but they are the bad guys of this. So Spielberg is not available. So they're like, who else is like a young, hungry guy who's got some credibility that we can get? And they think of Richard Donner, our hero of the story, an all-American good guy. Richard Donner, one of the great middle-of-the-road populists in film. One of the great generic showmen.
Yep.
You might know him from The Goonies, the Lethal Weapon quadrilogy. Personal favorite of mine when I was a kid, Maverick. I don't know why I like that movie so much.
I like that one too.
But
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was fun. I mean, Mel Gibson, what a charming guy. I mean that non-ironically. Mel Gibson, people forget. What a great star. Conspiracy Theory, Scrooged, Lady Hawk.
Did he direct Conspiracy Theory?
Yes, he did.
What a terrible piece of garbage.
Yeah.
Well, that's like one of those.
Scrooged is even worse.
Yeah.
I believe it.
So Richard Donner's only ever as good as the material, but he's a very good craftsman. I mean, Lethal Weapon is quietly a better movie than
Did you guys
Die
know there
Hard.
was that he directed a Goonies sequel?
Can't be true.
It's right here. The Goonies 2, Hey Again You Guys, with a totally different cast or something like that. Maybe it's not pulling up for me. Oh, no. It's some kind of...
Yeah, I'm seeing articles here that say, why the Goonies 2 never happened, despite many scripts.
Okay. Maybe it had to do with Corey Feldman.
Well, in any case, Corey Feldman's his own Hollywood tragedy. But in any case, Donner, he's really good. The action direction on the Lethal Weapon films, Lethal Weapon 2 was another personal favorite of mine at a certain age. It's got that wonderful diplomatic immunity.
I've got scenes of that in my head. It was like my dad really loved the Lethal Weapon movies. And Shane Black was involved in those.
Yeah, he wrote the script for the first two.
But we were never allowed to watch them, but it'd be like about bedtime or whatever in a Lethal Weapon movie. So you'd creep down or you get little bits and pieces of it.
Oh, yeah.
I've only seen TV edits, I think. I know that they have sex in them and stuff, so they were more unfriendly even than Die Hard.
Yeah.
So
I would say, just in terms of that style, they are better, objectively better. Like, he's a better action director than any of the Die Hard directors were.
What?
Like,
Better than Die Hard 1? You really think so?
I think the movie has... The thing about Die Hard 1...
Every day I get up and I find another reason.
Yeah, it's got a great emotional hook. Mel Gibson. I don't know. Die Hard 1, the thing about it is there's so much in between stuff. There's so many dumb characters that show up to just be dumb and keep John McClane. Like, when the action happens in Die Hard, it's amazing. The hanging off the building, all that. But there's actually not as much action as you want when you watch Die Hard.
Sure.
Maybe I'm just a crank, but I'm always just a little disappointed when I go back to Die Hard. It's such a wonderful Christmas movie, though. I've got the same opinion that the internet has. I'm different. Richard Donner, born 1930. He's an all-American good guy. Like I said, he served in the Navy as an aerial photographer and then became an actor, wanted to become an actor, was doing off-Broadway stuff. And then there's this story where he goes and he's acting in some TV show, like maybe has 2 lines or something. And the director calls him over. Nice guy, says, "Hey, Dick, you're not actually good at this acting thing. You don't want to be an actor. You want to be a director." And Richard Donner's like, oh yeah, I could be a director. And he's like, "Why don't you be my assistant director?" So through the random kindness of some guy, he becomes a director. And then he moves into directing TV, and he directs a lot of iconic TV, probably stuff that we've all seen something of. He directed Man from U.N.C.L.E., Gilligan's Island episodes, Kojak, like stuff for all the kind of iconic stuff. He directed Twilight Zone. He directed probably the most famous Twilight Zone, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. I don't know if you guys remember Bill Shatner. William Shatner is in the airplane. There's a little gremlin on the wing. It's one of those, you can't take
as iconic as it gets.
Plane ride without people of a certain age saying there's a gremlin on the wing. It's yeah, that's Richard Donner, and that's a great episode. And yeah, so he becomes a really reliable TV craftsman, and then he gets his big shot with a little movie called The Omen, which is the best of the post-Exorcist satanic panic boom. Gregory Peck, of all people, plays the senator who may or may not have the Antichrist as his adopted child. He's trying to figure it out the whole movie. Strange accidents are happening to people who interfere with this child's life, and the kid's acting a little strange, and maybe he's the Antichrist. I don't know. And as far as those kinds of movies go, it's the best. It's fun. It plays with that 70s paranoia really well, and actually does a pretty credible job of Is Gregory Peck just crazy? What if you just found yourself having with a kid later in life, and it was unpleasant and some things happened, and then you started weaving this wild theory? So Donner does a really good job, has a big hit with that. He's hot, and he's like this guy. He's had one hit, so you can still get him cheap, but he's got some credibility. So our all-American good guy, Richard Donner, gets a fateful phone call one day from slimeball European Alexander Salkind. And Alexander Salkind says, "This is Alexander Salkind." I don't know what kind of accent he has. "Do you know who I am?" And Donner's like, "Yeah, I do. Thanks for calling." Because Donner, remember, he knows the Salkinds are famous for the Salkind thing, the Three Musketeers thing. So, and the next thing on the phone is, "We want you to do Superman." And Donner's like, "Yeah, right. Nobody can do Superman. That's a bad idea. Thanks for calling." And then the next thing on the phone, "We'll pay you $1 million. And Donner says, "Yes, how are you? What can I do for you? Let's talk." So, and that's exactly how Donner tells the story, by the way. Donner's a really fun guy to watch interviews with. He's very avuncular, very likable. I've listened to whole commentaries of things he's done. I like him a lot. He's a good teller of his own myth. But much like Luther luring Otis into his pay, our slimeball European villain gets our hero with the offer of $1 million. And with the offer of working with Packman and Brando, who we've already hired for a huge sum of money. And so that's the Salkinds. They want something, they just throw money at it. But they are also shifty people, as we'll find. So they're like, "Hey," so Salkind's like, "We have a 500-page script. It's by Mario Puzo. You're going to shoot 2 movies at once. We already have a release date set." Donner's like, "I don't know. I don't know if anyone can really do Superman." Salkind's like, "We'll send you the script." So later that day, a messenger arrives with this giant tome, 500 pages. And Donner looks at the script and he's just like, "This is terrible." Puzo has no affinity for this material. He does not care about Superman. It's just junk. It's campy. It's actually the later Superman movies is what it is. It's really silly. There's a scene where Superman encounters Telly Savalas' character of Kojak from TV, and Telly Savalas says his catchphrase like, "Who loves you, baby?" or whatever. Like, it's just like all this junk. It's like these people don't care about Superman. I guess they see something in this intellectual property, but there's nothing in the script to indicate they have any reverence for this character. And Donner, our hero, does have reverence for this character. He grew up reading Superman. Superman triggered his imagination. He's like, if they make this movie, they're going to destroy Superman, and I don't want to see that happen. And I actually think I know how to do this. So he calls his buddy Tom Mankiewicz. So Tom Mankiewicz is interesting. He's the son of Joseph Mankiewicz, who directed All About Eve. And that would make him the nephew of Herman Mankiewicz, who wrote anybody. They just made a movie. David Fincher made a movie about him called Mank.
Citizen Kane?
Citizen Kane, yes, sir. And so he's got writer blood in him, but he'd become a James Bond writer and a script doctor. He would later doctor the script for Goonies. He's got his fingers on a lot of things that you like and have heard of, Gremlins. But he has the same reaction that Donner initially did when Donner calls him. He's just like, I can't do Superman. I don't know what to do. Like, Superman? Really? So Donner's like, just come over to my house and look at the script that they've sent. See if you can just help me with this. And so Mankiewicz drives over. As he's driving, Richard Donner rolls a joint, gets high. They've actually sent with the script a Superman outfit. Richard Donner gets high, puts on the Superman outfit. And when Mankiewicz drives up, Richard Donner comes running out in the Superman outfit, dancing around, saying, please, Tom, help me. We've got to make this script. We've got to save Superman. And Richard Donner is a very affable, likable, persuasive guy. So Mankiewicz is just like, okay. And Donner already knows. He's like, there's two things we need. People have to believe that this guy can actually fly, which means we can't cast Al Pacino or anything like that because nobody's going to believe Al Pacino can fly. And we need a love story, and that's what you can help me with. Let's get a love story, and let's get real verisimilitude. This has to feel grounded. It can't be. It needs to have some reverence for the material. So now Donner has to go and pitch to Salkind, our evil villain, that he wants to not go with their approach at all. And of course, this is going to light the fuse that's going to lead all the way to the end of our story, which is a sad ending. Although everybody made lots of money, and it's a pretty good movie, so maybe it's a happy ending. But Salkind is living in a hotel in Paris, because of course he is. So Donner flies out to Paris. He goes into the bedroom where Salkind is in bed. He said Salkind never got out of bed. He really is doing the Eurotrash producer thing. And the first thing Donner says is, Mr. Salkind, this needs a major rewrite. And Salkind says, no, this is a perfect script. And Salkind says, it's not a perfect script. And Donner starts to tell him his story, and Salkind just says, you're wrong. And Donner says, okay, thank you for the trip to Paris. I can't do this. And he starts to walk out the door, and Salkind's like, okay, because they have got this release date with Warner Brothers and this negative pickup deal. Like, they need to get this movie done, or they'll lose out on the $4 million they gave to Brando and everything else. So Salkind says, okay, tell me what you would rewrite. You sit there, they argue. Donner thinks he's lost. He doesn't think he's going to get Superman. He drives back to his own hotel in Paris, and then he gets a call from Salkind, and he says, okay, we agree. So our hero, Richard Donner, has to immediately jump into making this movie, which they already have this giant Puzo script. The machine is already whirring. They've got sets that are being built. Like, Donner just has to jump into the middle of this with a script that he does not believe in. So you'll see in the title sequence of this movie that it does credit Puzo and a few other people as the script writers. It credits Mankiewicz, I think, as a creative consultant. Mankiewicz is the one that I think they kept Puzo's structure. Puzo had a good idea of, we're going to do a big Krypton thing. We're going to do a Smallville and Norman Rockwell thing. And then we're going to do a Metropolis thing. But they really just tried to strip out everything that was campy, everything that was silly, find a real love story, find a real emotional through line. And Donner's doing all this while he's doing flying tests, while he's trying to figure out how to make the movie work. And the Salkinds, all they care about is what it costs. So Donner's like, these flying tests that you've done, they're total crap. And the Salkinds are like, well, they cost the right thing. You can see hilarious flying tests where they actually took a dummy and just catapulted it into the air. Like, that was one of their first ideas. And so you just see this really silly dummy go flailing across. It's like, what if they had done that with Superman? But they don't know. Nobody's ever done flying on this scale. Everything from the George Reeves thing didn't really work. So Donner is he's got all these units already running, people building models, and Brando is on tap, all this stuff. But he's got to pull this all together while it's already left the gate. And he's got to cast Superman, which is obviously really important. And our villains, Salkinds, like what they said to DC, they want Pacino, they want James Caan, they basically want the whole cast of The Godfather. Anybody from, all those kind of 70s guys. Dustin Hoffman. I mean, can you imagine? Just talk about little Jewish Superman. So he actually saw Stallone, who just had a big hit with Rocky. They hit it off. They said it was a very nice conversation, but they saw Pacino, saw Robert Redford. The producers were so desperate by the end that I think they did a screen test with Mrs. Salkind's dentist just because he looked good. Like, no star wanted to touch it. And eventually they started just looking for people, but they couldn't find anybody. Like, it's really hard. You might think all you need is a jaw, but as Christopher Reeve shows, and as I'm sure we'll talk about, like, it's hard to do this kind of thing well. And so they had to find Christopher Reeve, and he was just a humble all-American. I'm going to do a Ben thing here. Christopher Reeve, humble all-American Kansas boy who spent all day just eating apple pie off mom's windowsill. Except he didn't. Christopher Reeve is a good actor, and he is playing Superman. And Christopher Reeve, some kind of Dracula Superman. Christopher Reeve, the thing that you need to understand about him, that I want to emphasize, is he is an Ivy League East Coaster. That is Christopher Reeve. He is money. This guy comes from
That makes sense.
class. He is not.
He's a polo player.
Yeah, exactly. Christopher Reeve, born September 25, 1952 in New York City.
He's the guy who has the white sweater wrapped around his shoulders.
Yeah, exactly. He's the bully in the piece in Smallville. His father was a novelist, a poet, a Russian translator. He wrote a book of poetry that the dad did called The Moon and Other Failures, which I think is an awesome name for a book of poetry. He wrote The White Monk, an essay on Dostoevsky and Melville. His father wrote Alexander Bosque, Between Image and Idea. So his father's like an academic. When his father found out he was playing Superman, he said, "Oh, you've been cast in a production of Bernard Shaw's Man and Superman?" And Christopher Reeve had to explain to him, like, no. Which of course is based on Nietzsche. His parents divorced in 1956. He moved with his mother and younger brother to Princeton, New Jersey, where he attended Nassau Street School and Princeton County Day School, where Reeve excelled academically, athletically, and on stage. During his school years, he developed a passion for acting, participated in amateur plays, and worked as an apprentice at the Williamstown Theater Festival. So this he's a blue blood that likes to act. He decided to attend Cornell, choosing it over other opportunities to avoid the temptation of immediately becoming an actor. So he's good looking. He might be able to just like go get a play or something off Broadway, but he's like, I want to actually hone my craft by going to an Ivy League university. So Reeve joins the theater department at Cornell. And during this time, he receives an offer from a New York City agent. But instead of dropping out of college, Reeve stays in college, but he begins visiting New York once or twice a month to explore acting opportunities. And at a certain point, he takes a leave of absence from college and travels to Europe to immerse himself in theatrical productions and study the French theater. I'm at odds to emphasize all this because I want you to understand how much Christopher Reeve is not Superman and how good of a performance he's really giving. He finally transfers to the Juilliard School in New York City. He was accepted into Juilliard's advanced program, very Ivy League stuff, where he developed a close friendship with, does anyone know? He played a big blue genie in
Will Smith.
Yeah, Will Smith in embryonic form. No. He's a great friend of Robin Williams. John Houseman, the great serious classical actor, says, "You need to join the acting company. It's terribly important, Mr. Reeve, that you become a serious classical actor." Reeve is told by Houseman, who's like a famous actor presence of the time. But then Houseman says, unless of course they offer you I'll censor the word here. Unless of course they offer you a crap load of money to do something else, in which case you should do that. So that was advice that was given to Christopher Reeve early in life. After completing his first year at Juilliard, Reeve graduated from Cornell in 1974 with a Bachelor of Arts degree. And he got a Broadway play with the blue blood herself, Katharine Hepburn. And the story is that he had to come on and say his first line. He managed to come on and say his first line, and then he promptly fainted in front of the whole audience. And Hepburn turned to the audience and said, "This boy's a fool. He doesn't eat enough red meat." But apparently Reeve got better after that and developed a lifelong friendship with Katharine Hepburn. She told him, "You're going to be I can't do a Hepburn, but you're going to be a big star, Christopher, and support me in my old age." And he said, "I can't wait that long." So our hero, all-American good guy Donner, he's looking for his Superman. And this kid comes in, Chris Reeve, and he's got a great big sweater and blonde hair. And Donner's first question is, "Hey, what's under that sweater?" And Reeve takes off the sweater, and he's just this skinny kid. And Donner's like, "Kid, like, the guy that we hire has to be a muscle zoo. And Reeves like, listen, mister, I was a jock in school and then I went into acting and I lost 50 pounds. And Donner's like, nah, you're an actor. I could tell, like, you're not Superman. You're an actor. You're a Juilliard guy. And Reeves like, no, I swear I could do it. So Donner isn't that impressed by the interview, but then he goes and sees Reeve in a Broadway play that night. And Reeve, I guess, is playing both the father and the son, and he's doing transformative work, and Donner's impressed. And so they go ahead and they hire Reeve. They do already have Brando and Hackman to be the above the line kind of guys. So that works out well. Reeve needs to work out to bulk up to become Superman. And so he works out with David Prowse, who is famous as a muscle man and as, does anyone know?
No.
Darth Vader. He's the body.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
He's the body of Darth Vader. British dude that kind of has a weird relationship, or had before he died, a weird relationship with Star Wars because he always resented that they didn't use his voice. So he doesn't make it into a lot of Star Wars retrospectives and documentaries and things, but
He's the body double.
he's the body double, yeah. And he would argue the presence and the acting, and he would say he brought a lot to it. And maybe that's not wrong. I don't know. Anyway, Donner, our hero, he has his Superman, but he's going to need more than that to make his movie not horrible like the Salkinds would have it be. So he's got to get his Lois Lane, and he gets Margot Kidder. Obviously, we all know that. The story that Donner likes to tell is that she came in for her audition and she like tripped over a prop and stumbled. And just the way that she did that, he wanted to cast her on the spot. He's just like, this girl is bumbling and charming and self-effacing, and that's what we want. We need obviously Lois is a very forward kind of a woman, but she's also a very vulnerable kind of a woman at the same time. And we need a character that can be lovable doing both of those things and not just shrill. Easy to go wrong with Lois Lane. And so Donner wants to cast somebody that's innately bumbling and vulnerable and that you could believe misspells rapist and all that sort of thing. And Margot Kidder's perfect for that kind of thing. The other story that Donner likes to tell, which I'll just jump ahead and tell right now, is that Kidder had an eye injury on her first day of shooting. She scratched her eye and she couldn't use her contacts. And her performance really came to life that day because she was just wide-eyed and looking around and stumbling over everything. And it had that kind of goofy quality that Donner was looking for, the more vulnerable quality. So he got together with his stagehands and basically contrived, we've got to keep her contacts away. She can never put on her contacts for the rest of this movie. And so they were always coming up with reasons to make it so she never could see. But we'll talk about the rest of the cast real quick before we get into making the movie. You do have Gene Hackman at the height of his star power. He was not excited about doing this. He is a serious actor. But Gene Hackman's also always not been averse to taking the money. I mean, he did Poseidon Adventure in 72, which is not a great actor's movie. But he's on quite a run right now. 71, French Connection. 72, Poseidon Adventure. 73, The Conversation. 74, he's got that great cameo in Young Frankenstein where he plays the blind guy that's like ladling soup into Frankenstein's lap and all that sort of thing. Gene Hackman, of course, did not want to wear a bald cap or shave his head, was not interested in doing the most iconic thing that everybody knows about Lex Luthor. So they got him to agree to do one shot, and then they created this conceit where the character is vain and wearing a series of different bad wigs. Brando got $3.7 million plus a percentage, which ended up netting him $14 million for 10 minutes of work. You can do the math on how much money he was getting paid per minute there. Did all right for himself.
Wow.
Which, like Nicholson and Batman, the thing that they're bringing just as a marquee title, just as a name.
They bring gravity to it.
And the gravity, yeah, the sort of, I think that
it's more than just even the name of incredibility. It's actual gravity. When you open with your Superman movie with Marlon Brando as this like sad scientist father figure,
it really
brings a lot.
Anchors it.
It anchors it emotionally. Mm-hmm. If what you're going for is verisimilitude, and you're going to have a world as sterile as Krypton,
you better have the best actor you can get.
Yeah, like he put anybody else in his place, and nobody makes it through the first 25 minutes of that movie.
Yeah, Brando is a world unto himself, which is what you need. Like, I think you're literally right. I cannot think of another actor that could occupy that cheeseball set and make it work. Now, Brando would agree with us that he was important to the movie.
He deserved every penny that he was paid.
Well, he actually thought deserved more. He sued the production for $50 million of what he thought he was additionally owed. And that is why he does not appear in the original cut of Superman 2, which is super lame. They should have just paid him, I think, because Superman 2, even in the Lester cut, would be a lot better if it had Brando. But Donner is scared. He needs to, like Brando, famously difficult. He needs to figure out how to do it. So he calls Francis Ford Coppola, who's just done The Godfather. He calls people. Coppola's advice is, he's brilliant. Just keep him talking. Just get him to keep talking, and he'll talk himself out of any problems. And then Donner calls this guy named Jay Cantor, a really powerful agent who's worked with Brando. And Cantor's advice is, he's going to want to play it like a green suitcase. And Donner says, well, what does that mean? And Cantor says, well, it means he hates to work and he loves money. So if he can talk you into the fact that people on Krypton look like green suitcases, and then you only photograph green suitcases, and he gets paid just to do the voiceover, that's the kind of trick that Brando's going to play on you. Donner's like, okay, that's interesting. So he goes to meet Brando at his home to discuss the role. And Brando comes out immediately with, why don't I play this like a bagel? I mean, how do we know that people on Krypton didn't look like bagels? And Donner had thought that the agent was exaggerating. But in fact, the only thing the agent was wrong about is he got a bagel instead of a suitcase. Donner's just like, gee, Marlon, let me tell you something. Donner appeals to Brando, basically just says, there isn't a kid in the world that doesn't know Jor-El and what he looks like and this story. And you know what? He looks like Marlon Brando, actually. And so let's just do this for the kids. And Brando takes a beat. He looks at Donner. He smiles. He says, I talk too much, don't I? And they figure out the wardrobe, and Brando, apparently it was very pleasant. He did come for more money. You can't have a happy ending to a Brando story. Famously didn't come back for The Godfather 2, stuff like that. But he was very pleasant during the movie. He was pleasant with Reeve. Brando, at this point, has given up on memorizing his lines. He likes to, as he would say, just be spontaneous. So when he's holding the baby, when he's holding little Kal-El, the lines are written on the baby's chest. There's a lot of stuff like that. But Robert Downey Jr. wears an earpiece. Robert Downey Jr. has people feed him his lines, and he thinks it makes him more spontaneous. Maybe in both cases, they don't like to memorize, and they've gotten lazy. But also, when you're that brilliant, maybe you're allowed that. I don't know. In any case, there's also a story that a crazed woman came at Tom Mankiewicz with a knife, and Brando jumped up and used his sort of Brando powers of personality to talk her out of stabbing Tom Mankiewicz to death. So those kinds of stories just followed Brando. Oh, and there's one other thing to say about Brando before we move on, which is Brando suggested that the S on the chest be the family crest, which is now standard Superman comic book lore. But that's just something that Brando threw out as a joke almost. But so
you got that scene where everybody has their own family crests.
Right. And that's a cool piece of, I mean, I think that's way cooler than Superman having a dorky S that stands for Superman. So all the pieces are in place. The actors in place. Now the battle is joined between our hero, Richard Donner, and the Salkinds. And Donner's whole thing, he actually writes the word verisimilitude on a little plaque in his office with a picture of Superman. And he's like, we have to make this something that people can actually believe in. But the Salkinds don't want that. They are constantly pressing for more comedy, more goofiness, more camp. They will not tell him the budget, only that he's going over it, which is incredibly frustrating and not how you're supposed to do it, not how any director would want to be treated. Like, he doesn't know what his parameters are. He just knows that he's over them, which is just, if anyone's ever worked for someone like that, it's just an awful thing. So Donner's running around between like different units, the model unit, the special effects guys over here, trying to desperately to pull something off. Mankiewicz is constantly rewriting the script. You have the producers saying, make it silly, and Donner wanting to revere what he sees as the great American myth. And they have to get the special effects to work if this movie is going to work. And they are working on that. The main thing is the flying. They try catapulting a model. They try actually a model that's built to fly, like a rocket-powered kind of plastic Superman. The way they eventually did it is pretty obvious to see now. They have cables. Anytime Reeve is flying out of a scene and he's actually there, you're just watching a guy, like a Peter Pan stage production or something. You're just watching a crane pull him and get her out of shot. But the other stuff is front projection, which is more complicated than rear projection. It involves mirrors and stuff. Basically, they shoot all the footage from a helicopter, and then Reeve in a studio is just performing in front of a background. And Christopher Reeve gets all the credit for making this look good. Like they had stunt people and actors and models try it, but none of these people understood what Christopher Reeve understood, because Christopher Reeve was a glider pilot. He understood aerodynamics. He understood how to just move his body so that it looked like he was flying. And that's something that no one else, it's so intuitive to us, post fact, like we watch it and we're like, of course, but nobody knew how to do that in a convincing way. And Christopher Reeve apparently saved it. Now, like I said, they were trying to make 2 movies, and they had this release date that was built in. They're not, at a certain point, they realized we're not going to finish this. We need to just scramble to get the first movie done. So they steal what's meant to be the ending to the duology, the time travel stuff, and they put it at the end of the first movie. And they're just like, after this movie comes out, we'll have time to figure out what the ending for the second movie is. But they just get it done. Against all odds, our hero, Richard Donner, pulls something together that actually does take Superman pretty seriously. And the movie comes out, and it's a giant hit, and it's a critical hit, and critics are snobs.
Comic book movie? What?
Yeah, there's some
blockbuster, popular appeal. No.
New York Times says, for Vincent Canby, famous crank Vincent Canby, quote, "For me, it's as if someone had constructed a building as tall as the World Trade Center in the color and shape of a carrot. Rabbits might admire it. They might even write learned critiques about it and find it both an inspiration and a reward, while the rest of us would see nothing but an alarmingly large imitation carrot." So that was the New York Times.
Oh my
That's
goodness.
hilarious.
But Roger Ebert, our boy Ebert, said, "Superman is a pure delight, a wondrous combination of the old-fashioned things we never really get tired of: adventure and romance, heroes and villains, earth-shaking special effects, and you know what else? Wit. That surprised me more than anything. This big budget epic, which was half a decade making its way to the screen, has an intelligent sense of humor about itself." And that's obviously what the better critics, the more far-seeing critics say, and that is what the audience says. And the movie is a huge hit and does really well. And Donner didn't know whether anything was going to work. He finally saw the movie with an audience and was like, we pulled it off. And he's excited, and he's going to go work on the second movie. And he's like making his travel arrangements. And then he gets a telegram from the Salkinds, which simply says, "You are no longer needed." And that is the end of Richard Donner's association with Superman. We will pick up this story with Superman 2, but basically, as everyone knows, they hired a comedy director to make the movie they'd always wanted, which was a campy comedic sort of thing. Richard Donner had actually shot about 70% of Superman 2. Richard Lester, the other guy, reshot a lot of it so that he could get directorial credit. But there is what works about Superman 2 in its theatrical form is the structure that Donner and Mankiewicz and these people had already put on it. A lot of what we don't like is just these guys being like, we need guys to pay to blow off when there's wind from the superhero fight. It's just like really dumb stuff. Although it is important to remember that Richard Donner, while I have been casting him as reverential, and while he did allow a lot of camp and silliness into this movie, and some of it's fairly successful, I'd say, in both movies. We can get into that, but that is the story. The Salkinds suck. This guy pulled something together against all odds. They didn't make it easy for him, and then as soon as it was successful and they could catch their breath, they sent him a telegram saying, "You're no longer needed," and then they proceeded to basically get one more good movie out of the leftovers of what he'd done, and then just drive the franchise into the ground for the next decades. And you could argue Superman as a cinematic property has never really recovered. Like, what's worse, you can imagine Richard Donner just doing 5 or 6 of these with Christopher Reeve and them all being
really nice.
Really nice. Like you said, Ben, I think you're right to say Richard Donner's he's not a visionary or an artist or anything like that, but he did basically understand this is an American myth and we have to take it with some level of gravity. For heaven's sake, we've got Brando. He didn't do much to salvage Hackman's disinterest, I would argue, but I guess we could talk about that. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that is the story of the making of Superman. All right, fellas, we've been dancing around it for a while now. We'll talk through the film, talk about some individual pieces, talk about that awesome credit sequence, stuff like that. But what are your big picture thoughts on Superman, the movie?
I was disappointed by how poorly it held up for me this go around.
You've seen it many times in your life, I guess. Though.
Yeah, a lot as a kid and only a couple of times as an adult. So I have a lot of nostalgia for the movie. It holds a special place in my heart. I feel like I like Superman 2 better, or maybe the Donner cut of Superman 2, or maybe that's just the little kid in me who likes Rocky 4 best and who likes Last Crusade best and doesn't know what he's talking about. But it's got a lot that works and a lot that's really smart, but at least on the whole, I don't know. It's hard to picture. It's like you're going to get 45 minutes before you see Christopher Reeve on film, on camera, right? And I don't know. There's a lot to, I don't know.
The way I would put it is almost every scene has something that doesn't work. There's like so many things about this movie that are bad or dopey or have aged poorly that you would think that in summation it would be a disappointment. For me, at least, the sum is greater than the parts. Like it adds up to pretty great experience, even though almost not a minute goes by that I'm not like, that was lame. And my wife, she'd never seen it before and had no interest, and she watched it and she was like, that was a really good movie, which is saying something. But she was also like, what? Huh? Like the whole movie, it's
got a bunch of head scratchers in it. If you pick it up, it's really easy to pick apart. Like Krypton is stupid. Everything about Krypton is retarded. It's just ridiculous. We spent a lot of time in Smallville with Clark Kent feeling like a dope. Although I think Smallville itself is actually pretty great.
Yeah, I like the way that the Kents are played and everything, but yeah.
Then we moved to Metropolis and everything is nasty and grimy and dirty. And
you forgot about a long trek into the Antarctic.
Oh, yeah.
A big exposition dump of the same information we've already gotten from earlier.
Right. Well, you just tend to want to forget all of that. And then the Fortress of Solitude, which is such a stupid set design. It's the only idea that we had was it needs to be other and feel other and to feel alien. And so let's make it cold and sterile. I don't need to retread that. I've already riffed on that. But then it's like, okay, now we're in this like petty crime thing with this Otis guy and this cop's going to get killed in the subway. And now here's a woman that's all over the place, and here's the Gene Hackman part. It's like, and now Superman's going to go flying with Lois Lane, and she's going to be doing some weird kind of "Can you read my mind?" beat poetry. It's just like, wow.
Yeah, there is a lot. I don't know, Ben. Before we get too far afield, what's your big picture thoughts?
Yeah, there's plenty that doesn't work. I really didn't remember seeing the movie the whole way through.
I never liked. As a kid, I hated everything to do with like the ending from California on. Like
you did,
yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, let's save that. Let's get there in the getting.
Well, I enjoyed it. I don't think I'd want to go back to it because there is something that doesn't work in every scene. I wouldn't want to go back to it for a while at least.
It's long.
It's long. There's a lot to be charmed by. I like Brando. I like Smallville. I like Reeve. But then there's a lot of random clunk.
Yes. Including, I would say, the entire villain stuff. I just basically think that Hackman doesn't work. He's doing what's required of him. I don't think...
Yeah, it's very uninteresting.
But just the whole conceit of Lex Luthor as a bumbling villain is just no fun. And you can have a good bumbling villain. I'm not necessarily against it. But Otis and it's just like...
It's really odd.
It's like if the Salkinds just wanted cheesy camp, that's where they... made their compromise, and it's a bad compromise because it means you have no credible threat in this movie. You just have a goofball, and then we're asked to believe that he's going to goof around with his minions and they're going to reprogram a missile while wearing bad disguises.
It's really just dumb.
Some of that stuff is pretty disheartening. You're like, oh no, another scene of this.
Well, at least we didn't have to watch the 3-hour television version, right? Which has even more of that, apparently.
Because there are 3 different versions out there of this. There's the television version, which you can still find, which is 3 hours. There's the There's the version that's normal, the theatrical cut, and then there's a slightly extended
By 8 minutes.
cut.
Which I think you saw, right? Or did you confirm that?
I just saw whatever was on HBO.
That's what I watched.
Yeah.
I watched it on Amazon, but you had a scene that I don't think was in mine.
Frisky?
Well,
Did you have Frisky?
Of course you did.
Yeah, of course he rescues the cat, but it's after that.
The joke, quote unquote, the girl getting a slap?
It gets cut short.
Yeah, there's a longer Frisky.
Okay.
There's a long Frisky scene where Superman actually gives her a speech about fear and stuff that's pretty sweet, which is only in one of the extended cuts. And then, well, in any case, yeah.
Maybe I just missed.
It's just, you
I'm
get
not
the
sure.
No, you probably just miss it because it cuts right at the moment where you know, as someone in the audience, that she's about to get slapped or spanked. Like the cut is timed with the spank or the slap.
But you do hear it.
You do hear it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
But
blow
it
lands.
is the blow and the cut, though, are at the same moment. So you hear it as you're cutting to the next scene.
Right.
Interesting. I must have just missed it. All right.
It's so funny.
Yeah.
It's part of I think, the genius of how this movie actually works and what's exciting about James Gunn.
That James Gunn can actually tell the story of a dark. I read some of the discourse on this scene. There's a lot of it that's out there on the Frisky scene.
I'm sure there is.
So yeah, let's Frisky sidebar. So Frisky sidebar. Then we'll talk through the movie. Then we'll be done. So yeah. I guess what you're saying. Well, why don't I let you say what you're saying?
Well, okay. So just if you've not watched the movie, if you're a listener, this is the thing that we love about Superman is we're getting our introduction to his powers and him going around and saving people and being introduced to Metropolis. And so, of course, we have to have the scene where he takes time to pull a cat out of a tree. He takes time, he pulls the cat out of the tree, gives the cat back to the little girl. The little girl goes inside. As Superman's flying away, she's like, Mommy, a man flew up in the tree and got Frisky. And Mom's like, how many times have I told you not to tell lies? And it's gonna,
Yeah, and then you hear a whack of some sort.
A whack of some kind, right? So Superman saves the cat, and all it does is get the girl a nice big spanking.
Mm-hmm.
So what's exciting about seeing sort of the machinery of so we talk a lot about how it's really easy to tell a good villain story and to paint and to draw evil. And it's really, really challenging to draw good.
Right.
And so when Peter Jackson does it, he just turns everybody into glowy angels.
They're shining and they talk like this and they're sort of gay and
yeah. And very, very fey, right? And so it's just a real challenge. And Zack Snyder's not even going to bother. It's just like, I don't know how to make a Superman that feels virtuous or feels like he's otherly, right? But what this movie does, what I think it cracks is, well, let's focus a little bit less on Superman, a little bit more on just dialing up the background behind him. Mm-hmm. So at every turn, like this Metropolis is pretty gross. It's pretty evil. It's pretty vile. Like the reporting room is a vile place to be. Like there's just like everything is dirty and gross and nothing is wholesome, right? So at any turn,
even when they're walking down the street, you'll just linger. The camera will linger for a second while somebody's like, "You stole from me," or I don't remember what it was, but there's a specific moment where it's like, why'd they leave that on it? And it doesn't really go anywhere. It's just to add a little flavor of
unwholesome vibe, right? To stand as contrast to just wholesome Kansas boy Clark Kent / Superman. And that's where I think the genius of what Donner does, or what Donner's able to get out of this movie, or how it just sort of the alchemy of it works. Christopher Reeve is giving a performance. I had no comprehension of understanding how great a performance it was as a kid.
Right.
And I think maybe a lot of people don't, because they think of Superman as, or Reeve as just playing a zero. But man, the distinction between Clark Kent and Superman, and just that sort of ability to hold a sort of moral, wholesome center with all of the background noise of chaos and violence and just general like ickiness and unwholesomeness, is part of the magic of what makes him feel so strongly virtuous. And he's not going to tell a lie. Like everybody is lying. Like This movie is just everybody's lying and out for themselves. Everybody is lying, and everybody's got an angle, and it's sex and it's violence and it's all these other things. And here he is in the middle of it all. And so what's exciting then about Gunn is like, I think Gunn can understand and see. Yeah, I think he's the kind of guy who has the vision to be able to look at this movie and look at everything else and be like, okay, yeah, I totally get why and how this works. And I'm going to have a lot of fun building a nice black backdrop for my wholesome Superman. I don't have to, like, I have a lot of fun telling these kinds of gross stories, and I can just tell as many of them as I want in the background. And it's just going to make my Superman look that much more awesome and wholesome and cool to people. I think he can pull it off.
Yes.
For exactly that reason. And I may have stolen that insight from you at some point, but it's very clearly on display if you're just trying to watch and figure out how it works.
Yeah, I mean, in the best Superman stories, the mistake with the Superman story, the mistake that Man of Steel kind of makes, is Superman's not actually a character. He is a deus ex machina. That's what he was built to be. He's not built with dimensionality. He's not built with interiority. And those can be flaws if you're trying to bring those things to a place where they're not required. But you can actually build a really intriguing, interesting story around what if deus ex machina existed? What if a god was among us? What if this person that now, in addition to that, Christopher Reeve actually does bring some interesting interiority, I think, to this character. So I'm not trying to say that there's nothing there. But Superman as a force of nature is actually a legitimate way to tell the story. And we don't need the psychology of him feeling cast off by his parents, or we don't need to find that hook, that boring Hollywood hook.
We don't need any psychology at all. Part of the beauty of what I think is fun about even how Smallville sets up Superman for us is he's embraced the role from the beginning. And we know that there was some struggle with it as a kid of I have to just be better than everybody. And because I am better than everybody, and that's okay. But he's embraced that role and he's learned it. But he's so competent and so strong. He has enough confidence and security to just be bumbling Clark Kent. He really can live there. And then when you see him on the balcony with Lois as Superman, the charm and the charisma that he's able to turn on from that strength and confidence, it's just, I don't know. I think
that's another example of what we're talking about, because it's it's not from it's not from the boy's perspective. Will the boy get the girl? It's from Lois's perspective. And Lois is a 70s, whatever wave of feminism woman that is. And she's tough and she's out for herself and she doesn't want any kids. And her dilemma is, well, there's one guy that I would cook for and have his babies.
That's right. There's one guy that's strong enough to make me accept that feminine role.
Right. That's classic Superman. I mean, a great Superman story is actually from the little girl who catches the spankings perspective. I'm making this up, but this is the kind of thing you see in the best Superman comics. Well, my mom's always on my case and she thinks I'm always lying. And then Superman flies into my life one day and he saves my cat. And then that gives me the strength to take it and transcend it somehow. And it's just stories of, I live in a sad, broken little world. I have my regular people problems.
But there's hope.
And there's a savior. I mean, there's a savior out there. There's a Messiah. And so Superman can't be everywhere. He can't save everyone. But just the fact that he can come and get my cat out of the tree. One of the think pieces I said...
There's always the possibility that the next time I'm in some kind of jam, he just might show up. He just might be there.
This is a little overblown, but I saw one think piece on the Frisky scene, because there's a lot of internet. What is that scene doing in the movie? And it's pretty funny because you watch Zack Snyder's movie, you just realize if you had a kid get spanked in a modern Superman movie, people would revolt and throw their chairs. But we'll have cities get leveled and random passerbys get blown up and Superman will break Zod's neck and nobody cares. That's just, it's just
he had to. He was going to kill innocent people.
Yeah, I know. And to be fair, in Superman 2, he punches them into that. Whatever.
Yeah.
But it's just funny how morality has shifted. Something like the little girl getting slapped, we would never do that in a million years now. But
we might do it, but then Superman would take their truck and tie it up into a pretzel and
Yeah, Snyder's Superman comes back and
pick-
lasers
and then
off
pick-
mom's arm and
Yeah.
says like, how,
pick on somebody your own size.
why don't you pick on someone your own size?
Kind of like Superman goes back to that guy in the bar and beats the tar out of him, and both the Donner and the Lester cut.
Yes, well, again,
Been
terrible.
working out.
Yeah, that's right.
Terrible moment. There's lots of things that don't work in all these movies, and it's just too bad.
Well, the one where he gets absolutely trashed, that moment totally works though.
That does, yeah.
Yeah, but he should have gone back and given the guy a pamphlet on not drinking or something. I don't know how you handle that, but it was cheap the way that was done.
That all gets really, really cheap.
Yeah. But that's just
And really petty too. Like there's the one gym scene. There's a gym scene too where he throws the weights at the guy when the girl's not looking or whatever. I don't know.
I don't remember this.
You just see creators that don't actually have a coherent vision of who this guy is or why this resonates. Anyway, the think piece that I saw was like, because in the slightly extended cut, I think Superman actually does she's like, Frisky, you bad kitty. And Superman's like, actually, sometimes we get scared and we're not able to do our things. And so the think piece was like, this little girl is stuck in this cycle of not being believed by her parents and being tyrannized by this mother. And then she's enacting it on this cat. And then Superman comes and says, don't do it to the cat. Like the cat is just scared. Superman actually gives her an entire perspective on her life and on whatever trauma she has from her relationship with her mother. And then she goes back in and she's still going to have to deal with. Now that is overblown. That is more than the filmmakers. I think mostly they just thought it was funny that in a cynical kind of way that Superman doesn't solve every problem. They love that joke so much, by the way, they do it twice. It happens in the dam scene in Superman 2. I forget which cut or whether it's both cuts, but Superman rescues a little boy and then...
Niagara Falls.
Niagara Falls, yeah.
The dam's in.
And then the mother is like, how dare you embarrass me? And she starts slapping him as Superman.
I vaguely remember this.
So they thought that was so funny. They loved the idea that... But I think there is actually moral content. It's not just a joke. It is the idea that Superman's not fixing everything, and that it is the diamond against the black velvet. It is this world kind of sucks, and parents suck, and you take beatings for things that aren't your fault, and that's what Superman's here to fix. But also, he can't fix everything. But just having him there means at least you don't drown in Niagara Falls. So anyway, I think we close the Frisky tab.
Yeah.
All right. So let's go through this flick. So we start with the credits scene. Actually, we start with this really dorky black and white. Here's an old comic book. Comics sure are lame, huh? And then the John Williams theme. Mm-hmm. It's a statement of intention, I think. It's like hey, remember that lame thing? Remember how you thought this movie was going to be lame? Here's like a little black and white thing. Get some nostalgia going. But then state of the art, John Williams, amazing theme, which we haven't talked about John Williams. The only thing
three-dimensional.
The credits come whooshing past. It's just like, this is not your daddy's Superman right here. It would be like if the new Mario movie started with 8-bit Mario just jumping around and then blew out into, and maybe it does.
Which
for all it
does. Yeah.
Okay. There you go. Well, I wondered.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And then becomes a plotless, meaningless. Okay, never mind.
Yeah, like the Superman movie.
Yeah.
But man, I miss credit sequences. I love just the amount of anticipation you can build just with music and a few simple special effects here. It's like this movie would not play the same without this sequence. And John Williams doing most of the work, but if you're hiring John Williams, let him do the work. I've heard John Williams talk about this. He's like, the thing that I love about Steven and George is that they write into their movies silent parts where I can do the work, whereas a lot of directors just don't actually give me space. There's dialogue or sound effect, but these guys want me to lead the way some of the time. And then we go to Planet Krypton. Do we all agree that Krypton actually basically sucks?
Yeah.
In this part of the movie?
Yeah.
I like the sentencing of Zod and Non and Ursa. That's pretty fun. But it's like Marlon Brando walking around in tin foil, and he's got this little, I don't know. I guess it's the best part of that whole extended sequence. But yeah, this whole thing feels like Doctor Who. Or also, I just don't buy the fact. I've never really bought the fact that about the lore in any of its versions that he doesn't just leave the planet.
Yeah. Yeah, I found that hard
It's
to
dumb.
believe with this one. Pretty stupid.
Right.
And pretty bad parenting. Come on.
Yeah.
It's just lame. You have to have a better way to keep him on the planet if you're going to do that.
I love the sort
he
of
decides to have the noble, I won't contribute to panic as everybody dies around me. I will die with them all. So like, come on.
So
but I will
stupid.
send my son away to be raised, I guess, hopefully. Guys, just like,
I mean, you're combining two sort of Jewish myths, so to speak. You've got the Old Testament prophet of it all, the Babylon's coming, but no one will believe me. Everybody wants to be complacent. All these false prophets are talking. You've got that. And then you combine that with the story of Moses, and they're both really resonant, but it doesn't quite, it's like, okay, if you really know that Babylon's about to raise the city and kill everybody, then
It's just bad world building.
yeah, it's just bad world building. I could buy a version of you're going to cause mass pain. No, I couldn't. There's no way to make this work. I mean, obviously the reason they don't want him to leave is because everybody will panic and leave. But from Jor-El's perspective, that's a good thing.
Of course it is.
Even if people rampage and overturn fruit carts and
some people die in the process.
Crystal clerks, Nathan.
yeah, sorry, crystal carts.
That's all that they have on Krypton. is
It's still
crystals.
better than anything else that could happen. It's better than everybody getting blown up. But Marlon Brando, like one of you guys said, he earns his paycheck and he brings some gravitas to it. He's quite good. He's there to play. He's got a British accent for some reason that I don't quite understand. But it is interesting to me how much this movie feels the need to set the table. Like it doesn't trust its audience to know the Superman lore. Like now you'd be like, oh, everybody knows and is on board with this. We live in a nerd-saturated culture, but this movie's like...
We also live in a culture that has had this movie around
yeah.
for 45 years or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it makes sense that it would be that way. It is just different. Like, you don't need that much of... like, if James Gunn wants to spend no time setting up who Superman is and he wants to just jump into telling a Superman story...
We'll all be here for it.
We'll all be here for it, and no one will be confused. And even if you brought your grandma, she wouldn't be confused. Anything else you guys want to say about Krypton or any of that? I hate it. It's really claustrophobic. I hate bad Doctor Who sci-fi sets and worlds where like old Star Trek stuff where you just feel trapped on a small set in a world that's supposed to be expansive. It's pretty lame.
It's lame.
Then we have a long sequence of Brando giving exposition. Like this movie over-explains. It really is like at pains to... Brando gives some of the same lines of dialogue multiple times just to make sure we understand the rules that will later, even in the third act of this movie, be blithe about. But we want to make sure to do as much table setting as we possibly can. We get to Superman landing on Earth, meeting the Kents, Jonathan and Martha Kent, our Norman Rockwell adventures. And Donner said we did 10 Commandments, Norman Rockwell, and then newspaper picture were like our 3 parts. Newspaper comedy, His Girl Friday or something. So, and Reeve, by the way, is playing Cary Grant. It was very consciously modeled on how Cary Grant would do something like that. Kind of bumbling, bringing up baby kind of stuff. Anyway, what do you guys think about this? The Smallville stuff.
I enjoyed it a lot.
Ma and Pa Kent are really great.
Yeah.
They bring a lot for almost no screen time. It's amazing how little screen time Jonathan Kent gets.
He's one of the most emotionally affecting parts of the movie. And the little touches of just him saying, oh no, when he realizes he's about to have a heart attack.
Yeah.
It's just that,
really.
Just that.
We set that up really obviously. Careful your heart. And then, oh, come on, let's run to the bar and I'll race you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that oh no moment is, really sweet.
It's great.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just the right level of... It's always interesting to me when a filmmaker can do something this sentimental, this Norman Rockwell, and not make you want to just vomit. And I don't know exactly what the trick to that is, but...
Underplay it.
Yeah, underplay it. I think it's... Yeah. You can't sentimentalize a subject that's already sentimental. You just have to aim your camera and shoot.
For goodness sake, it's just everybody's grandpa.
Yeah. And everyone's grandma.
And everyone's dad someday, too.
Yeah, and there's no, they don't try to make it any more or any less than that. And
yeah, I love that they don't spend a lot of time on, well, I'm leaving you, Mom. I gotta. And she's just like, I knew this day would come. And as a cynical person watching it so many years later, I'm like, oh, okay, I hope he visits her. So, this is a hard thing.
Yeah.
But you're not supposed to think about that. It's just the myth. Zack Snyder solved that problem by having Zod grab her by the neck and then Superman, leave my mother. How dare you threaten my mother? Well, things blow up around them. It was not a good way to solve that problem.
No, but the callback later in Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, where it was Martha. Yeah, that was good. That was good.
Because when you're dying, you say not mom, you say your mom's name. Whatever that is. Like when you're in pain and you're calling out for your mother, you always use her Christian name.
Yeah, that's what everybody does.
That's the one logical flaw I just exposed in that movie. Other than it's perfect.
Oh, no.
I do really like outrunning the train. I think that's one of the most fun practical effects.
Yeah.
And that is just a guy on a crane being pulled along next to a train, obviously sped up. But
yeah, that's great.
Okay, Superman says bye to mom. And then I have no patience for this part of the movie. Maybe you guys want to make an apology for it, but
I didn't mind. I was like,
he's going to go find himself or whatever.
I was like,
that's when I started checking the clock to be like, how deep into the movie are we?
Mm-hmm.
This is at least an interesting bit of homework to be doing right now. Like, how far in are we going to get? Checking my watch, pulling it up and being like, 40 minutes.
That's where I think
45 minutes.
Obviously, for this big story they're telling, we need the Fortress of Solitude, we need Jor-El back. But if you just cut that scene out of this movie, the movie plays exactly the same. Nobody would question or care that Superman is suddenly Superman and revealing him. Like, be like, oh yeah, he went away for a few years, he showed up, he's getting a job, he's Superman. Like,
if we had just cut to Metropolis and Clark Kent, that would have been just fine.
Yeah, if you literally just lifted this out, did nothing else, I don't think anyone would mind. But and I like the idea of him having his sort of.
Well, he's had a crisis, right? His dad, as he knew it, died. Then it was revealed to him that he wasn't really his dad, and now he has to go find himself and figure out.
But he already knew that, right? That's the idea. Like, I always got the impression he always knew.
Well, he definitely gets.
He goes and finds the thing, right?
He goes and finds the crystal, but the crystal's like calling to him because it's the time or something. It's like the impression Jonathan Kent gives you in that scene before he dies is that he's
when
always,
you came to us or something like that.
Yeah, he's always raised Clark to know, like, you're from out of this world. And
typologically, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether Moses thinks he's a prince of Egypt or knows he's actually Jewish. It doesn't matter how much Jesus knows he's divine. And this is the template we're following. Moses and Jesus both discover something about themselves, and then they go out into the desert and they get the call, the burning bush. Jesus faces temptation, and then they come back empowered to do their missions. That's sorry, I don't want to be blithe about the actual story of Jesus, but that is just typologically what we're drawing on here. And maybe it's why you do need him to go into the Antarctic, kind of go into exile and face himself.
Yep.
But I think some kind of an actual test, or I guess it is just the Moses story. He meets his father in exile and then comes back as the hero. So yeah, typologically it fits with Moses perfectly, fits with Jesus pretty well, which makes sense. But you sure do have to put up with a lot of, we're going through a star field and Marlon Brando's narrating stuff. That part drags.
Yeah.
But then Christopher Reeve comes out in his Superman suit and he flies. And then we go to Metropolis. And like Jake said, the city kind of sucks. And Lois doesn't know how many P's there are in Rapist, and suddenly we're in like a newspaper comedy, and it's every newspaper office must be His Girl Friday, or the boss must be like a lovable curmudgeon, and everybody must be talking over each other. I'm being a little unfair because, of course, Superman was developed in the 40s, and all these cliches that they're drawing on, Superman drew on the original versions of and helped create. So you can't say, Perry White's just doing His Girl Friday. Of course he is. And I like all this stuff. I like all the... I don't know. What do you guys think about Margot Kidder as Lois Lane?
Oh, she's fun. She's fun. She is a good comic actress. She's got just enough. They have a good... I'm losing words here because I just had lunch. But chemistry, that's the word.
They have good chemistry.
They have good chemistry.
They do. I mean, I think she's from the same school as Marion Ravenwood a couple years later, where
Yeah, she's the obvious comparison point. It's pretty much trying to play the same character.
the woman who's tough to the whole world, but weak at the knees for exactly one man, our hero. And although Marion takes a little while to reveal that, but Marion kind of has the Clark relationship with Indiana Jones mostly, and only kind of sidles up to him as Superman a couple times, and then she smashes a mirror in his face, and it's hilarious. Then we cut to a comedy shot of a ship with him screaming. But yeah, man, if James Mangold would just understand this way of writing a strong woman, like what I'm dreading we're going to get with Phoebe Waller-Bridge in this new Indiana Jones movie is just an omnicompetent girl boss who can do everything.
And who's woke.
But that's not interesting. Like, you want a character that has, man or woman, you want a character that has vulnerability. The thing about Marion is she's not strong enough to just beat up the Nazis, but she's smart and she can take care of herself, and she'll run into a thing and find a frying pan to hit the guy. Like, she's tenacious, but she's not
resourceful.
Yeah, she's got qualities that we would all look for in a woman or in a wife, but she doesn't transcend her sex. She's just a strong, vibrant example of it. She's all woman when it comes to our hero, and that's Lois Lane. The fun of Lois Lane is that she's actually a woman, even if she doesn't want to be. And I think that Margot Kidder has a nice line in that kind of thing. Yeah, and then we're going to get to Superman starting to reveal his powers. He's going to catch that bullet, and literally smile to the camera. Like, just Christopher Reeve is really good at doing that kind of thing without making you despise him or the movie. He'll just like wink at you, like he almost breaks the fourth wall. And John Williams, for all his virtues, he's kind of corny about the way that he'll give a little musical trill there. I mean, I like it, but John Williams does do something that I hate in this movie, which is maybe the movie asked for it and he just gave them what they wanted, but he writes like bumbling comedy music.
Yeah, the villain.
It's Otis, he is stupid.
Yeah.
Christopher Reeve, obviously great as Clark Kent, but yeah, we get Superman saving a bunch of stuff. Do you guys feel like that held up, or like
It's pretty great.
Yeah,
I think it's the template, and the only thing that comes close, well, I would say the one thing that maybe supersedes that, passes it up, is Amazing Spider-Man's similar.
Well, Amazing Spider-Man, and especially Part 2, he's one of the only heroes that's actually allowed to do a lot of hero stuff, like rescue people, like movies. Even
I think it's the opening. Is it the opening scene of Amazing Spider-Man 2 that I'm thinking of?
The kid in the car or whatever.
Yeah, the kid, the science project.
Maybe that is Spider-Man.
But no, that's Amazing Spider-Man 2, but that's like a midpoint scene. That's later. That's not opening scene. It's probably 20, 30 minutes in or something. He
just gets a couple of sequences that have nothing to do with the plot of him just Spider-Manning out, right?
Yeah. It's great.
And he's going to stop, and some kid's getting beat up in the back alley, and he's going to help him fix his science project and tell him it's cool and stuff like that, you know? Little things like that, super sweet.
It just makes you realize how many superhero movies, even the ones that we love, are fixated on violent action. And there's a whole other kind of fantasy that is really powerful, which is the fantasy of someone saving you, someone fixing problems.
Or Spider-Man was my Spider-Man. What if he was my hero? What if he could fix my actual real life problems? And that's the thing that both of those movies, or both those sequences do. And I can't think of another superhero movie where you really see that sort of thing.
That'd be a large scale plot. Like, we've got to get the people off of the Guardians just did this. We got to get the kids off the thing. And that can be sweet.
We got to get all of Sokovia off of the rock that they're now on.
Which is obviously...
We leave nobody left behind because we are just like big time commenting on what Snyder did.
Right. And if Snyder had just added a scene of Superman grabbing a little girl and getting her out of the way, that would have gone a long way, just to symbolize the fact that this guy even cares what's happening. But Snyder does not care what's happening, which is what makes him terrible. But yeah, I actually started tearing up weirdly just a little bit during the helicopter scene of all things. And I think it was just because I'm so used to scrolling on Twitter and seeing news stories about car accident. Like, it's just like everything's terrible all the time. And just the fantasy of a guy who shows up and fixes things. Just like that helicopter accident didn't go bad. Nobody died. that jewel robber, he went to jail. Like that cat is out of that.
Yeah.
I had a cat stuck in a tree. It was stuck for 10 days. It almost died. And finally we had to knock it off. It was getting so cold that we got a painting extension pole and knocked the cat out of the tree. And it almost, like, I would have loved to have Superman just steal my cat. Steal my cat. Yeah. I would have loved to have Superman save my cat. Like, just the idea that there's somebody that can just show up and make things right that are wrong in the world is such a powerful fantasy. And it's weird how much superhero cinema does not tap into that at all. Like,
it's exactly what is most potent and most powerful about Superman in particular. Like the mythos around Superman in particular is that there's just nobody too small for him.
Right.
And there's no problem too small for him. And if he's got a chance, he can't do everything, but he'll do everything that he can. And it's just, he's just not above the cat in the tree. Every bit of responsibility he's able to take, he takes. That logic doesn't hold up when you just think about Clark Kent sitting at a desk at a typewriter. But still, just the same, that is what people love and play with about Superman. And that's why the movie has the cat scene. That's why everybody's favorite panel one of the great and most famous and favorite panels in all of Superman is the All-Star Superman panel that
the girl going to commit suicide, and he just comes and talks to her.
Yeah, and he's in the middle of fixing all these great big problems because he's going to die. And he's going to stop and take time to just talk to the girl who's about to commit suicide.
Right. And it taps into, you just are so hungry
for somebody to care.
I didn't have a great relationship with my dad, but I've still got that feeling of, man, when I was 5, there was someone who could just kiss my boo-boo and everything was better. The world made sense because there was someone who just had it covered. And
felt safe.
The fantasy of Superman, the fact that he can give that to a cynical adult, that he can give that to Lois Lane or to Jimmy Olsen or to us, to me as an audience member, it's such a powerful, powerful thing. And it is why I'm excited about James Gunn, because I think James Gunn he has said he wants to make a movie about kindness, whatever that means. And I hope it means exactly what we're talking about, that he just wants to be like, here's the world's dad, and he's going to fix all the problems.
Yeah, we're going to have a horrible, nasty world. And he's going to basically try to do a not sappy version of the thing that people do in Starbucks lines, right? Where you
pay for everybody behind you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's what we want. Yeah.
And it'll be really sweet and sentimental without being sappy, and it'll make you cry. And I think whatever Gunn's doing is going to end up building towards that all-star Superman story arc. I think that's just inevitable because I think that's who he is, and I think that's how he wants to reclaim Superman. I have no reason to believe that except
you really want to.
I want to. And some of that would be wish fulfillment, but also I feel like
some of it's in Guardians 3.
Yeah, I feel like that's what I'm watching in terms of the stories that he's telling in his own evolution, the story that he's telling about himself and his own personal growth. I think that's what he's communicated to me, reading between the lines as to where he's at. Now, okay, maybe he's just a slick, cynical salesman, but he sold me, so I'm here for it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little scared because if Harley Quinn or Rocket Raccoon caught a mom disciplining a daughter after they got the cat out of the tree, they'd vaporize her arm and say, I can't give a hand to your parent discipline, or they're like,
right.
I'm like that.
Yeah, but he
taking
knows
revenge
where to
on what's
draw
wrong.
those lines.
I think so. Yeah,
I think he knows to draw those lines with Superman, and I think that he can get away with putting any number of other characters in his movie that would and maybe do that exact sort of thing. You just have to keep Superman clean.
Superman can't let it happen if he's there. These are the things
right.
I'm afraid of. He can't approve of it and turn a blind.
He can't wink.
Like he has to just always think there's a better way.
That's right.
And enact it.
and he has to win in the end. Like, his better way has to win.
Yes.
He has to leave the world a better place. And so when he dies at the end of the All-Star Superman arc, the world is actually a better, more hopeful place for having had Superman there. And there's hope.
I'm all for it. I hope that that's exactly. And I think the other thing is that you can say about Gunn is he loves the comics. He knows what makes a good Superman story, as long as he's able to get his own demons out of the way enough.
Which is what he's told us that he's done.
Right.
And even the fact that, which we didn't know and so didn't comment on, the fact that
Drax
is actually carrying out
the High Evolutionary,
the evolutionary in saving him. So we actually know for a fact that
it wasn't just another cheap Marvel
cop out.
We're not gonna kill this guy. We're
just gonna passively leave him to a certain doom. No, they actually carried him out and saved him.
Right.
And there's a shot of it in the VFX guy, and everybody's like, yeah, that's who it is. That's who it was supposed to be. It got whittled down, but yeah, no.
Yeah,
they carried him out of there.
The James Gunn
everybody
actually has a little empathy, maybe even misplaced empathy for High Evolutionary. I'm all there for that guy.
Everybody deserves a second chance. Isn't that what?
That's what someone says to Adam Warlock.
That's what Groot says, I think, to Adam Warlock.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Well, okay, after Superman saves all this people, saves Air Force One, you get a lot of fun. I mean, the other thing that Superman movies in particular thrive on, and that Marvel weirdly has forgotten to give us in most of its movies, is you really want audience surrogates reacting. You just want the people on the street. You want I know everybody makes fun of it's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman, but it adds to the fun of these movies to have the guys in Air Force One looking out the window and not believing it and rubbing their eyes and...
Don't look, just...
Spider-Man movies have that.
Spider-Man does have it, yeah. I think many of the Spider-Man people have had a good line in that. And a sense of identity for New York, and they have a sense of identity for Metropolis. Okay, now we have our romantic evening. Superman shows up, and we go flying, and I don't know, it's a little weird.
It does go on and on.
I think when it's just John Williams doing the work with his music, it's pretty magical. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is a bit of a Aladdin and Jasmine moment. It's fairly transcendent. But then Lois Lane sure does go into a poem. And it sure is stupid. And my understanding is that Margot Kidder was actually supposed to sing it, and they were like, that doesn't work to have a song. And so they just had her recite it. She wasn't going to open, like the character of Lois wasn't going to sing it, but you were going to hear like a song on the soundtrack sung by Margot Kidder. So instead they had her recite it. And yeah.
Boy, does that not work.
You also get, as these movies do, even the best of them, of the old Superman movies, you get the kind of weird color of her panties stuff. Like, just, that feels a little out of character.
Something for Dad.
Yeah, something for Dad. Well,
Mrs. Teschmacher.
Speaking of something for Dad, yeah, let's talk about Miss Teschmacher. Let's talk about Lex Luthor, and let's talk about Otis. I don't like any of this stuff. I just think Hackman's super lame. The comedy's not funny. The lair isn't that cool. The plan is stupid.
It's all very lame.
Does anybody want to make any defense for any? And I don't like the way that Miss Teschmacher dresses. I'm against it.
Nope, we just wanted a Bond girl in there.
Yeah. Is she actually? Or we just...
No, I don't think so. I just mean that's kind of...
Yeah, just...
That's the coding.
The role. That's the coding,
really
right?
is like the something for Daddy.
She's the villain henchman who's going to end up having the hots for our protagonist.
Yeah, I don't like the fact that it feels like kind of a weird... Joseph Campbell wouldn't approve of this, that she saves Superman. I don't mind someone saving Superman, but it just doesn't feel like Superman has to...
And then she kisses him.
Overcome anything.
Yeah, it feels it's a little creepy. I mean, I don't like it.
Yeah, it's... So we got Miss Teschmacher. I like Gene Hackman. I think he's great, but he's just miscast here. He doesn't have anything interesting to say.
He's a pretty good Lex Luthor.
Kevin Spacey?
Yeah.
Kevin Spacey is
it ain't
actually awesome.
Jesse Eisenberg, so it must be Kevin Spacey. Yeah, Kevin Spacey was born to play Lex Luthor. It's too bad he didn't appear in a better movie.
We are going to have to do Superman Returns after this.
Yeah.
At some point.
I've been wondering about that too.
Yeah.
But yeah, so...
we should just treat it like a trilogy. And
yeah, right? That's what I think.
Maybe, well, let's do it. Yeah, but Gene Hackman sucks. He feels like a middle manager. He doesn't feel like a super villain. He feels like the guy that owns the Arby's that you work for, that you don't like that much. But he comes up with a goofball plan, and we spend a lot of time with him enacting this plan, wearing different disguises, while John Williams' music tells us how whimsical and funny this all is. But
I like how some of the lines are even like, you know what the number 200 has in common between me and you?
Oh
yeah.
man, there's
It's
a lot
your
of
weight
dumb
and
stuff.
my IQ. Like what? There's so many dumb jokes like that.
That
I'm just
feels
that
like-
doesn't even work.
that feels like
on
old
any
comic
level.
book writing. Like you always have these guys who they have to write the script and maybe writing isn't actually like, that feels like the kind of joke that would be in Superman comics of a certain vintage. But
Yep.
I still don't want to see it in this movie. It's I don't know. It's just like something walked in from the 1960s Batman. It's like all the campy stuff that Donner was fighting to keep out. It's bad. But yeah, they cause a big earthquake and Superman has got to
Fix the fault line.
fix the fault line. I thought that was cool.
Yeah. Where he goes underneath the Earth's crust and lifts it up.
I like all the
It's really fun.
The model work is cool. It's fun to see some of the more successful old special effects with the dam breaking and stuff like that. It's pretty cool. Like I said, I always love the train thing. Yeah, but then Lois dies a brutal death.
Yep.
The dumbest thing in all of cinema happens.
Yep.
I'm sure there's many internet videos where nerds complain about this. So I don't know. I'm sorry to be that guy, but I hate time travel so much. I hate the time tuners in Harry Potter so much.
Turners.
Turners, whatever. Yeah, they should have been called time tuners. That would have been cooler. Once you can do this, why does anything? I know you're not supposed to ask. I know you're supposed to just go with it. I know I'm being the fun police here, but why would anything that Superman doesn't like ever happen again? Why would Sirius Black die? Why would just come up with a plot reason why we can't?
They destroyed all the time turners
I know they did.
right before it happened.
Did they really?
Yeah.
I don't remember.
No, all the time turners have been confiscated and are like in the Ministry of Magic. Fact check me on this. I'm pretty sure this is how
No,
it
I think
works.
you're right. But
They're all there. And the only reason the only real plot hole is why on earth did Dumbledore think it was a good idea, or McGonagall think it was a good idea to give Hermione Granger a banned time turner from the Ministry of Magic when they're so volatile and so dangerous so that she can get an extra class in?
yeah, but Dumbledore's just an idiot that always does crap like that. So I guess it works.
Or he's a genius who knew that it would be then there on hand at the end for the saving of Sirius Black and Buckbeak. But yeah, they all end up getting destroyed in that fight, like all of them. And so now there are no more time turners in the wizarding world because they were all there and they all got destroyed in that fight.
All right, great. It all makes sense.
Yeah, that is a very compelling fix.
If I'm Dumbledore, I'm just going to hang on to one of those babies. Like, come on, keep one in a drawer. Like,
Yeah, if you can manage to get one from the Ministry of Magic and give it to a student, you might as well just keep one lying around.
yeah, and you
in
can't tell me
case.
Dumbledore couldn't be like, sorry, Ministry, I lost it. What are you going to do? Arrest me? I mean, you guys suck, just like all bureaucracy does.
Wait, hang
but-
on a second. Let me go back in time to the part where you figured this out and
Right.
fix that.
Yeah, do a Kenneth Branagh curse on you
Yeah,
or something.
exactly.
I think Superman is the real time turner.
Yes,
Because he turns that globe. Now, he's not fast enough to catch two missiles, but he is fast enough to turn the Earth's rotation back and
This is all about relativity, right? So if he just
Mhm.
goes fast enough in one direction, he's the one who's actually traveling in time.
This movie sucks
It's
relative
like
to.
the Flash.
Right.
Yeah,
But he's
it's
not
rough.
fast enough to catch the missile. Okay. Yep. I got it.
Well, he had to go to
Makes
Jersey
sense.
first.
Well, it takes him a long time to catch that missile. You think if he could circumnavigate the Earth in 10 times in under a second, he could get the missile in one missile going hundreds of miles in less than 20 seconds, but he can't.
Did you actually do this math, or are you just making it up, Ben?
I'm pretty sure that I'm just good at this kind of math, Jake.
Well, your math makes sense emotionally.
Okay, that's good. That's all that matters to me.
These are 2 minutes that are going to go down as the best in all of podcasting history.
Yeah, that's right.
No, I mean, your math makes more emotional sense. It makes more me sitting there watching a movie sense than their math does. And so your math wins. Like, it's dumb. At least don't insult me by spending 40 minutes at the top setting up all this lore and making it so ponderous if you're going to then act like none of it matters and we're just in a stupid comic book at the end. So I don't know. And that is the dumb thing about the Donner cut, is that it uses that again.
I was going to say that, but then I didn't.
But in any case, Superman saves the day.
It does?
That's okay. Spoilers. I know this because I read it, but the way that the Donner cut film ends is that instead of giving Lois a magic kiss so that she forgets he is Superman, he turns back time to all the way to the time before he accidentally freed the villains from the Phantom Zone. Everything is undone. No Superman 2 plot actually happened. Yay, Superman is the winner. And that's how Superman 2 ends, as I understand it.
If you think about it as...
Really?
Yes.
Maybe I haven't actually seen the Donner cut.
Yeah, I wonder.
At least the Lester cut wasn't that dumb. I mean...
My
I don't know
suspicion, based on reading things like that, is that, yes, it's nice that the Donner cut takes out a bunch of cornball humor, but I don't think it actually works. Unfortunately, I think Donner just didn't get to shoot / conceive of.
Mm-hmm. What would have actually been the good version?
I mean, the Lester cut has so many really dumb things like that when he throws the styrofoam S at Non or the magic kiss. It's like, it's ridiculous. I know the Donner cut has Brando, which is sure something, but I don't know. Jake was saying beforehand that he remembered before we started recording that the Donner cut's superior, and I think it probably is, but I was like, I don't know how far you want to go out on that limb, because I think we might find that there just isn't actually a version of Man 2.
My memory is that several years back, I watched Superman the movie in a friend's home theater, and it was an awesome experience. Watched it with my kids, my whole family. It was super cool. Shout out to Josh again. Thanks for that. That was a really cool experience. Amazing home theater set up in his house. And then I turned around and showed my kids Superman 2, and I think I checked out the Donner cut at the time because I hadn't seen it. And so that's my memory. And I remember thinking, I like this, and this isn't as silly as I remembered it. And that's nice. But it still gives me most of the same memories of most of the same story and most of the same stuff, but just with less of a silly, campy vibe to it. So that's my memory, but that was a long time ago.
Yeah, we'll find out. Like I said, I don't know what to do. Maybe we should just decide on mic right now. We have to represent both cuts on this podcast. I don't know how excited I am about watching both cuts, though. I think...
Yeah, if we could each watch a cut.
Yeah, I think we probably just need to split them up.
We could each watch 2/3, and then one of us could watch 1/3 of each, and that way...
I know I want to watch the Lester cut just because I have nostalgia for it, and I remember it. Like, I don't know. Maybe we shouldn't have this discussion on mic. We'll figure it out. We have to talk about both cuts. It might be a little deadly for us all to have to watch both cuts. So, yeah.
I feel that way.
We'll figure it out. We'll figure it off.
Too.
We'll figure it out off mic, folks. But yeah, Superman saves the day. But it does actually make sense. Putting the time travel at the end of part 2 does at least make sense of one of the things that purists always complain about, which is Superman killing Zod and Ursa and Non, and so casually. Like, they don't die, and as Donner and Mankiewicz conceived it, they just go back in the Phantom Zone. I've also heard people say that them falling into that misty crevasse doesn't represent death. Like, if you know the lore, they're actually falling back into the Phantom Zone or something like that. But the way it plays to someone who doesn't know the lore is, well, I've successfully stripped you of your superpowers, so I'm going to now execute you. And Lois Lane is going to say, you're a real pain in the neck, and then execute the girl, because girls can fight girls and boys can fight boys. That's how these things work, or how they used to work before society crumbled.
Ruined everything.
Who ruined everything?
Society.
Yeah, society did ruin a lot. We needed Superman here to say...
We live in a society.
Yeah, no, we needed Superman to say, that's not how biology works. Men and women are different. Remake that Star Wars movie, Kathleen Kennedy. Superman could have done a good job of running Lucasfilm. That's my contention. So, Superman saves the day. He delivers Luthor a notice straight to prison. Just takes him into a prison yard, which is very Batman 66 again. and gives a nice speech to the warden or whatever.
Until they get a fair trial.
Until they get a fair trial. Yes, that's right. And he flies away into the sunrise as John Williams' theme beguiles us with its awesomeness. And that is Superman. The first one, apparently when Lester took over, I really should save this for next podcast, but when Lester took over, he had one meeting with John Williams to talk about how they were going to continue the music. And John Williams was so frustrated by the meeting that he walked out and said, I will never work with that man. And John Williams did no more music for this. Of course, they repurposed his themes, but this is the suckage of everything post-Donner is. And if you see John Williams, he doesn't seem like a very chill guy. Like you feel like it would be fairly easy to not make John Williams angry in a meeting.
Yeah, he seems pretty easy to work with.
Yeah.
Maybe not, but...
I mean, I'm sure he's exacting and all, but, you know, if you just went in there and treated him like the maestro he is and had a little respect for his ideas, but also tried to have a productive push and pull artistic collaboration, I'm sure. I feel like the three of us could get John Williams to do a score just fine, but not Richard Lester, not the Salkinds. All right.
They're the worst.
They're the worst. Folks, that is your podcast on Superman. Ben, how many crystals? Oh, and the way that Luther figures out
But how does he figure it out again? I'm trying to
kryptonite,
remember.
I don't know. It doesn't make
It just doesn't make any sense.
He's just like, I've done the math, Mr.
Yeah.
Schmucker.
That was dumb. That was dumb.
Yeah.
How many crystals?
Yeah, how many crystals how many crystals do you figure are in the Fortress of Solitude? A lot.
But it's a whole lot.
We'll say 12,000. How many crystals out of 12,000 do you give to Superman the movie?
Out of 12,000?
Mhm.
Oh, man. 8,000.
8,000. I was wondering if you might not say 8,000.
Huh.
Jake,
You know me well.
same question?
I was gonna give it 9,000. I'm gonna give it 10,000. And the reason I just bumped it is because I think one of the things we have to give it points for, or I feel compelled to give it points for, is being the first.
Yeah.
Its special effects, its score, the opening credits, the flying of it all, the guts to take a superhero movie and try to make it feel grounded and make it play to the masses in a way that's compelling. And the fact that it did it successfully in every movie, it created space for every superhero movie to come downstream of it. And every superhero movie downstream of it is in some form of conversation with it and benefited from its pioneering work. I think gets it extra points to cover for some of the mess that it made. But you put that together with it actually honoring the character of Superman in the process. And you said it earlier, the movie as a whole is greater than, or the sum of its parts.
The sum is greater than the parts. Is that the phrase?
The whole is greater than the...
Well, it depends on which thing you want to say.
The individual parts don't all work, but they add up to something more
the sum is greater than the parts.
Or the whole is greater than the sum of the parts?
Oh, dear.
Yeah.
Now
I'm confused.
now we've lost it. What in the world just happened?
The sum is greater than the whole of the parts? There's a hole in the sum of the...
There's a hole. There's a hole. There's a hole in the sum of
Dear
the parts.
Liza, dear Liza.
The whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
There we go.
That's correct.
Anyway, Jake, you were saying...
I think the whole being greater than the sum of its parts, the pioneering work of just the guts of, we're doing it.
Mhm.
We're doing a superhero movie, and it's not just any superhero movie. We're swinging for the fences. We're going for Superman, and we're going to try to make it feel grounded. We're going to try to make it feel like a movie that fits in the 1970s and that people can buy into in the 1970s. And then they sold it, and people loved it, and it worked. And it created space for the entire superhero movie genre and the whole American hero story to shift from these sort of cowboy stories to these more fantastical comic book stories.
Yep.
It's a fulcrum, and it's a pretty key piece. And so I think it gets bonus points for that, even though it doesn't quite hold up as a truly great movie in and of itself.
Yep, I would agree with that. I would like to say I wrote down 10,000. It's right here. I knew you were going to say 10,000. After Ben said 8, there was nowhere you could go but 10. I don't know what you would have said if you'd had to start, but
Well,
You'll never know.
my super genius of predicting how many crystals. You guys want to predict what all? Here, I'll write down what I'm going to give it, and then now you guys can predict.
9,000.
That's correct.
That wasn't hard at all.
It wasn't hard at all.
I thought it might take you a second.
No, false. After Jake's speech, I'm tempted to give it 9,000, but whatever, I'll be.
You're locked, baby.
Whatever.
Jake's speech is correct. And Jake's speech, you could almost bump it up to 11 or even 12. Like, it is that important.
Well, there's a difference. It depends on how you want to evaluate it.
Right. As an actual experience to sit there and watch, it's more of a 6 or 7 or 8 or something. But then you get done and you're really happy and you really do feel like it adds up to something a little bit more than you just forget about Gene Hackman goofing around with the missile and you remember the cool stuff and you love it. I mean, I do think, in addition to what Jake said, this movie does get a number of things right that a lot of movies that came after it would get wrong. I mean, you really have to go all the way to maybe Raimi or Nolan to see people pick up the thread. Like, as soon as we get to Burton's Batman, which we'll talk about this when we get there, but they're going to so heavily stylize everything. Like, their solution to making a superhero fit into our world will be to change our world so that our world fits a fantastical superhero, make it a weird gothic kind of comic book world. And the fact that this movie does so much to actually just put Superman in the regular 70s world is something pretty special and something that wouldn't be intuitive and wouldn't be cracked. And the Salkins are immediately going to ruin that. It's immediately going to become camp, starting with Superman 2 and then getting worse as we go. And so I think Donner had something special. He had a good idea. I wish he'd been able to keep doing it. But then we wouldn't have the Goonies.
Yay!
Yay! Goonies never say die. I could care less about the Goonies. But I guess I like the Goonies. Whatever. They're the Goonies. What are you going to do? I'd be sad if we didn't have the Lethal Weapon, I guess. I'd be sad if we didn't have Lethal Weapon 2 in Diplomatic Immunity. Oh, so 9,000. Yes. With some scenes being like 4,000 and some scenes being 12,000. Well, folks, that's Superman. This may be the longest podcast we've ever done, period. And it may be certainly the longest podcast on Sanity at the Movies. I'd have to check that. I think that is correct, though. So I hope you feel like you got your money's worth. Maybe our next podcast will just descend into pure camp and we'll edit out everything that's good and put a bunch of corny jokes in after the fact. In any case, until next time.
I'm here to fight for truth, justice, and the American way.
Mustache marker!
I thought about, no, I never drink when I fly.
I never drink when I fly. Oh my goodness. Is there a
Great joke.
All right. Goodbye, folks.